They say the worst pain isn't being hated, it's being invisible. Elara Whitcombe knew that truth better than anyone. On the night of the midsummer ball, the Duke of Ashford didn't just reject her. He destroyed her in front of everyone who mattered. His words cut deeper than any blade. Unmarriageable, forgettable, a waste of a dowry. The ballroom erupted in laughter. She stood there, frozen, while her world collapsed. But here's what no one expected. Elara didn't cry. She didn't beg. She walked out of that glittering hell and disappeared into the wilderness, where survival doesn't care about your face, only your spine. This is her story. If you want to see how a forgotten woman became unforgettable, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. Let's see where this story travels tonight. The Whitcombe carriage rattled through London's cobblestone streets, each bump a reminder of Elara's mounting dread. She pressed her gloved hand against the velvet seat, steadying herself as her mother's shrill voice filled the confined space. "Sit up straight, Elara. For heaven's sake, you're slouching again." "Yes, mother." "And smile. You always look so dreadfully serious. Men don't want a woman who thinks too much." Elara's jaw tightened, but she forced the corners of her mouth upward. The reflection in the carriage window showed her what she already knew. Plain brown hair pulled too tight, gray eyes too wide set, a face that inspired neither poetry nor passion. Next to her mother's porcelain beauty and her younger sister Violet's golden radiance, Elara had always been the shadow. "The midsummer ball is your last real chance," her mother continued, adjusting the emerald necklace at her throat. "You're 23, Elara. 23. Do you understand what that means?" "That I'm practically ancient?" The sarcasm slipped out before she could stop it. Her mother's fan snapped shut. "It means we're running out of options. Your father has been patient, but patience has limits. Lord Pembroke's son showed interest last season. Lord Pembroke's son has the personality of wet toast and the breath to match." "Elara!" "I'm sorry, Mother. I just meant, what you mean is irrelevant. What matters is securing a match before you become a complete embarrassment to this family." Her mother's voice dropped to a hiss. "Violet will debut next year. She can't have her prospects ruined by an unmarried older sister hanging about like yesterday's laundry." The words stung, but Elara had learned to armor herself against them. She turned back to the window, watching London's elite pour into the Ashford estate. Torches blazed along the drive, illuminating carriages that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Women dripped in jewels that could feed villages. Men strutted like peacocks, measuring their worth in titles and land. This world had never felt like home. "Remember," her mother said as their carriage stopped, "desperation is like perfume. Wear too much and everyone notices. Be available, but not eager. Smile, but don't laugh too loudly. And for God's sake, don't mention books." Elara nodded, gathering her skirts as a footman opened the door. The Ashford ballroom rose before them like a cathedral to excess, all gold leaf and crystal chandeliers, music pouring through open doors like honey. She could already feel the weight of it, the performance she'd have to give. Inside, the ball was a living organism, breathing, pulsing with gossip and ambition. Elara moved through the crowd like a ghost, recognized but unremarked upon. A few heads nodded in acknowledgement. Most looked through her entirely. "Miss Whitcombe." She turned to find Thomas Hendricks, a banker's son with kind eyes and uncertain posture. He wasn't handsome, but he was decent, which in this room was practically revolutionary. "Mr. Hendricks, how lovely to see you. I was wondering if, that is to say, would you perhaps consider the next dance?" Before she could answer, a honeyed voice interrupted. "Thomas, darling, you promised me the quadrille." Lady Rosalind appeared like a painted swan, all blonde curls and calculated charm. She didn't even glance at Elara as she tucked her hand into Thomas's arm. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitcombe," he mumbled, already being pulled away. "Perhaps later?" But there wouldn't be a later. There never was. Elara retreated to the edges of the ballroom, finding refuge near an alcove partially hidden by palms. From here, she could observe without being observed, her preferred state of existence. She watched Violet glide across the floor, already surrounded by admirers despite not officially debuting. Watched her mother network with the precision of a general deploying troops. Watched the world that had no room for her. "Hiding again, Elara?" She stiffened at the familiar voice. Marcus Caldwell, her brother's friend, appeared beside her with 2 glasses of champagne. He offered her one. I'm not hiding. I'm strategically positioning myself. For what? A quick escape? His smile was gentle, conspiratorial. Marcus had always been kind to her, in the way one might be kind to a stray dog, with pity, not attraction. Something like that. She sipped the champagne, grateful for something to do with her hands. You know, you could try dancing. Revolutionary concept, I realize, at a ball. I could, but that would require someone to ask me. I'm asking. She looked at him sharply, searching for mockery, but found only genuine offer. You don't have to pity dance with me, Marcus. It's not pity, it's self-preservation. If I dance with you, I have an excuse to avoid Lady Catherine, who's been hunting me like a foxhound all evening. Despite herself, Elara laughed. Well, when you put it like that, how can I refuse? He led her onto the floor just as a waltz began. Marcus was a competent dancer, nothing spectacular, but he didn't step on her feet, which automatically placed him in the upper tier of partners. See? Not so terrible, he said as they turned. Give it time. The night is young. Always so pessimistic. I prefer realistic. They danced in comfortable silence for a moment before Marcus spoke again, his tone more serious. You shouldn't let them make you feel invisible, Elara. You're worth 10 of these peacocks. Easy to say when you're not the one being overlooked. I mean it. You're the only person in this room who's actually read a book that wasn't about hunting or fashion. The only one who asks questions instead of just waiting for their turn to talk. That counts for something. Not in this world. The waltz ended, and with it, her brief moment of visibility. Marcus bowed, kissed her gloved hand, and was immediately claimed by his next partner. Elara returned to her alcove, to her role as observer. The evening crawled forward. She endured 2 more pity dances, one with an elderly baron who smelled of mothballs, another with a barely pubescent viscount's son who stared at her chest the entire time while standing on her toes. Between dances, she perfected the art of looking engaged while being entirely alone. Then the room shifted. It was subtle at first, a hush spreading like ripples in a pond. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned. The orchestra finished their piece and didn't immediately start another. The Duke of Ashford had entered his own ballroom. Elara had seen Alexander Ashford before, of course. Everyone had. He was impossible to miss, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that never quite stayed in place and eyes the color of winter storms. But it wasn't just his appearance that commanded attention. It was the way he moved, as if the world naturally arranged itself around him, as if his presence was the gravitational center and everyone else merely orbited. He was 32, unmarried by choice rather than circumstance, and wielded his bachelorhood like a weapon. Mothers threw their daughters at him. Fathers offered increasingly ridiculous dowries. He remained unmoved, untouchable, and entirely aware of his own power. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his voice carrying effortlessly across the ballroom. "Forgive my tardiness. Business in Parliament ran long, but I'm here now, and I believe that calls for champagne." Servants materialized with trays. The orchestra resumed. The ball exhaled and continued, now electrified by his presence. Elara watched him work the room, a handshake here, a charming word there, a devastating smile for the prettiest women. He was performing as much as anyone, but his performance was flawless. She wondered if he ever got tired of it, the constant theater of being the Duke. Quite something, isn't he? Elara glanced sideways to find an older woman beside her, Lady Thornton, a widow known for her sharp tongue and sharper observations. "I suppose," Elara said carefully. "You suppose. My dear, half the women in this room would murder their own mothers for one dance with him." "Then it's fortunate I'm fond of my mother." Lady Thornton laughed, a genuine bark of amusement. "I like you, Miss Whitcombe. You don't simper. I found it doesn't suit me." "No, I imagine it wouldn't." The older woman studied her with eyes that missed nothing. "You're the one who reads, aren't you? I heard you actually finished all 3 volumes of Gibbon's Decline and Fall." "I did, twice, actually. Twice." Good God, I couldn't make it past chapter 2 without wanting to stab my eyes out. Lady Thornton sipped her champagne. "Tell me, what does a girl like you make of all this?" She gestured to the ballroom. Honestly? Always. Elara considered her words carefully. I think we're all playing a game where the rules were written by people who never intended us to win. And we keep playing anyway, hoping that this time, maybe, the outcome will be different. Lady Thornton stared at her for a long moment, then smiled. Clever girl. Wasted on this lot, but clever. She patted Elara's arm and drifted away, leaving her alone again. The evening continued its predictable arc. Elara danced twice more, duty dances, both. She made small talk that went nowhere. She smiled until her face ached, and she waited for the moment when she could reasonably leave without causing scandal. That moment never came. Instead, something far worse happened. The Duke was standing near the center of the ballroom, surrounded by his usual court of admirers and sycophants. Lord Pemberton had just finished some story that had everyone laughing. The Duke's smile was polite but distant, the look of a man whose attention was already elsewhere. Your Grace, Lady Ashworth simpered, surely you must have some opinion on the season's offerings? My daughter Charlotte has been so looking forward to making your acquaintance. She pushed forward a girl who looked ready to faint from either terror or excitement, possibly both. The Duke regarded Charlotte with the same attention he might give a moderately interesting painting. Charming, he said, which meant nothing and everything. And what about a wife, Your Grace? Lord Pemberton boomed, emboldened by brandy. Surely it's time to settle down. Do a man's duty and all that. The group laughed nervously. This was dangerous territory. Everyone wanted to know, but no one dared ask directly. The Duke's expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. When I marry, he said slowly, it will be to a woman of substance, beauty, breeding, intelligence, someone who enhances my legacy rather than diminishes it. High standards, Your Grace, someone murmured, the only kind worth having. It was Lord Pembroke, drunk and mean-spirited as always, who said the words that changed everything. Well, that certainly rules out poor Miss Whitcombe. The statement hung in the air like a blade waiting to drop. Several people gasped, others pretended not to hear. Elara, standing far enough away that she shouldn't have been able to hear, caught every word with perfect clarity. The Duke's eyebrow raised. Miss Whitcombe, I'm not sure The Whitcombe girl, over there. Pembroke gestured vaguely in her direction, forcing heads to turn, eyes to search, finding her in her alcove like a specimen under glass. No, Elara thought. Please, no. Ah, the Duke said, his gaze landing on her. For one brief, horrible moment, their eyes met. His expression remained neutral, politely curious. Hers must have shown every ounce of her growing dread. Yes, I believe I've seen her at these events. Seen her, yes. Noticed her? Unlikely. Pembroke laughed, and others joined in, tentative at first, then bolder. Poor thing's been on the market for years. No takers. Perhaps her standards are as high as mine, the Duke said, his tone light but with an edge that should have warned Pembroke to stop. It didn't. Standards? Your Grace, with all due respect, she can't afford standards. Plain as a post, quiet as a mouse, and about as interesting as watching paint dry. Pembroke was warming to his theme now, enjoying the attention. Though I suppose she reads books, if one considers that a redeeming quality. Some might, the Duke replied, but not you, surely. A man of your position needs a wife who shines in society, not one who hides in corners. Miss Whitcombe is... Pembroke paused, searching for the word that would land the killing blow. Unmarriageable. The room went completely silent. Elara felt the word hit her chest like a physical blow. Unmarriageable. Not just unwanted, not just overlooked, fundamentally unsuitable for the very purpose she'd been raised to fulfill. Every eye in the ballroom was on her now, some pitying, some amused, some simply curious to see how she'd react. Her mother's face was frozen in horror. Violet looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. Marcus started moving toward her, but he was too far away, caught on the other side of the crowd. The Duke still watched her, and in his eyes, she saw something that shattered her completely. Assessment. He was actually considering Pembroke's words, weighing them like a merchant evaluating damaged goods. Then he spoke. Unmarriageable is perhaps harsh, the Duke said slowly, though certainly forgettable. The crowd erupted in laughter, shocked, delighted, cruel laughter that echoed off the gilded walls and crystal chandeliers. Some tried to stifle it, hands over mouths, but the damage was done. The Duke of Ashford, the most eligible man in England, had just confirmed what everyone secretly thought. Elara Whitcombe was worthless. He didn't even say it maliciously. That was the worst part. His tone was matter-of-fact, clinical, as if he were discussing the weather or the quality of the wine. She wasn't worth his contempt. She was worth his indifference. Forgettable. Elara stood frozen, her mind screaming at her body to move, to do anything, but she was paralyzed. The room spun, faces blurred. The laughter continued, wave after wave of it, drowning her. Then something inside her cracked. Not broke, cracked. Like ice on a frozen lake, the fracture spreading fast and irreversible. She had spent 23 years being small, being quiet, being what everyone told her to be. She had swallowed every insult, every dismissal, every moment of being overlooked. She had convinced herself that if she just tried hard enough, smiled enough, fit herself into a small enough box, someone would finally see her value. But standing there, in that ballroom full of people who had just watched her destruction with amusement, Elara Whitcombe realized something fundamental. She was done. Done apologizing for existing. Done shrinking herself. Done playing a game she would never win because the rules themselves were designed to break women like her. The laughter was finally dying down, people returning to their conversations, ready to move on from her humiliation like it was just another evening's entertainment. Elara walked forward. The crowd parted instinctively as she moved through them, her plain green dress suddenly feeling like armor. She didn't look at anyone except the Duke. His eyes widened slightly, surprised, maybe, that she was approaching rather than fleeing. She stopped 3 feet from him, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough to maintain the pretense of propriety. "Your Grace," she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake inside her. "Miss Whitcombe." He inclined his head, still wearing that infuriating expression of polite detachment. "Thank you." That got a reaction. His eyebrows rose. "I beg your pardon?" "I said thank you, for your honesty." She kept her gaze locked on his, refusing to let him look away, refusing to give him the comfort of her submission. "You've done me a tremendous service tonight." "Have I?" His tone was cautious now, uncertain where she was going. "You have. You see, I've wasted years of my life trying to fit into this world, trying to be what people like you consider valuable, but you've just reminded me of something crucial. I will never be enough for you, for any of you." She let her gaze sweep the room, taking in all the shocked faces. "And I've decided that's perfectly acceptable." Her mother gasped. "Elara..." "Because here's what I've realized," Elara continued, ignoring her mother entirely. "Being forgettable in your world is a gift. It means I'm free." The Duke's expression shifted, something flickering behind his eyes that might have been respect or curiosity, or just surprise that the mouse had found her voice. "Free from what exactly?" he asked. "From this." She gestured to the ballroom. "From pretending that any of this matters. From degrading myself chasing the approval of people who wouldn't notice me if I was on fire unless it interfered with their conversation." "You're upset," the Duke said, his tone infuriatingly gentle, as if she were a child having a tantrum. "Understandably so. Perhaps if you..." "I'm not upset, Your Grace. I'm liberated." She smiled, and it was genuine, the first real smile she'd managed all night. "You called me forgettable. You're absolutely right. I am forgettable here, in this glittering cage where a woman's worth is measured by her face and her compliance. But I don't have to stay here." "What are you saying?" her mother hissed, finally pushing through the crowd. "Elara, stop this nonsense at once." Elara turned to her mother, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time, a beautiful woman made brittle by a lifetime of trading her humanity for status. "I'm saying I'm done, Mother. Done with the balls, the performances, the desperate hunt for a husband who will never appreciate me because I'll never be pretty enough, docile enough, empty-headed enough for men like him." She nodded toward the Duke. "You're being hysterical," her mother whispered urgently. "You're ruining everything." "No, Mother, I'm finally fixing something." Elara pulled off her gloves, a deliberate gesture that felt like shedding skin. "I'm going to the country estate, grandfather's land in Thornwick." "Thornwick?" Her mother's voice rose. That's practically wilderness. There's nothing there but peasants and mud. Exactly. No balls, no judgment, no pretending to be something I'm not. Elara felt lighter with every word, as if the truth was lifting her off the ground. I'll manage the estate. Help the tenants live a useful life instead of a decorative one. You can't possibly. I can, and I will. Father's been trying to find someone to manage it for months. I'll write to him tomorrow. She turned back to the Duke, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Your Grace, I hope you find the wife you deserve, beautiful, accomplished, and bland enough not to challenge you. I'm sure you'll be very happy. Then she did something that would be talked about in London society for years. She curtsied, perfectly executed, exactly as she'd been taught, and walked out of the ballroom with her head high. Behind her, the silence shattered into chaos. Voices erupted, gasps and exclamations, and her mother's shrill protests. But Elara didn't look back. She kept walking, through the doors, down the steps, past the shocked footmen. Her hands shook. Her breath came in sharp gasps. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall until she was alone. A carriage approached, not her family's, but a hired hack that had been waiting for other guests. She flagged it down, climbing in before the driver could question whether a lady should be traveling alone. Where to, miss? Anywhere. Just away from here. As the carriage rolled through London's streets, Elara finally let herself break. She sobbed into her hands, great heaving cries that came from somewhere deep and wounded. She cried for every moment she'd felt invisible, for every time she'd smiled through humiliation, for the girl she'd been, who thought if she just tried hard enough, she could make herself lovable. But underneath the grief was something else, something fierce and new. Relief. The game was over. She'd lost, publicly and spectacularly. And in losing, she'd found something she'd been searching for her entire life. Permission to stop trying. The carriage took her to her family's London townhouse, where she slipped in through the servants' entrance, avoiding the staff who would ask questions. In her room, she pulled out paper and ink, writing by candlelight. The first letter was to her father, formal and businesslike. She requested permission to manage the Thornwick estate, outlining reasonable justifications, cost savings, family duty, her education making her suitable for the task. She didn't mention the ball. She didn't need to. News would reach him soon enough. The second letter was to Thornwick itself, to Mrs. Hadley, the housekeeper who'd sent her sweets every Christmas when she was a child. She announced her arrival and asked for a full report on the estate's condition. The third letter she started and stopped a dozen times. It was to herself, a list of promises. I will not apologize for taking up space. I will not diminish myself to comfort others. I will build a life that matters, even if no one sees it. I will be unforgettable where it counts, in the work I do and the lives I touch. She folded it carefully and tucked it into her journal. Dawn was breaking when her mother finally returned, slamming into Elara's room without knocking. Do you have any idea what you've done? Her face was blotchy, her perfect composure shattered. The scandal, the humiliation, will be laughingstocks. We already were, Mother. I just stopped pretending otherwise. Your father will never agree to this insanity. Then I'll go without his permission. I'm of age. Grandfather left the land to the family, but the management is father's to assign. And right now, I'm the only one willing to do it. Her mother stared at her as if seeing a stranger. What happened to you? Elara met her eyes. I woke up. 3 days later, after a tense confrontation with her father that ended in grudging permission, because truly, what else could he do with an unmarriageable daughter? Elara loaded her belongings into a traveling coach. Violet came to see her off, eyes red from crying. I don't understand why you have to go. I know you don't. Maybe someday you will. Will you come back for my debut? Elara hugged her sister. We'll see. Her mother didn't come to say goodbye. That said everything. As the coach pulled away from the London townhouse, Elara watched the city recede through the window. Somewhere in those streets, society was still gossiping about her spectacular downfall. The Duke of Ashford was probably already forgetting her, if he'd ever truly noticed her at all. Let them talk. Let them forget her. She was going somewhere she could become someone new, or maybe, finally, become herself. The journey north took 3 days. With each mile, the landscape transformed, manicured estates giving way to rougher country, then to the wild, rolling hills of Thornwick. The air smelled different here, sharp with heather and rain. The sky seemed bigger, less constrained by buildings and expectations. When the coach finally pulled up to Thornwick Manor, Elara's breath caught. She'd been here as a child, barely old enough to remember, but the house itself was smaller than she'd imagined, a sturdy stone manor that had weathered centuries, surrounded by lands that stretched to the horizon. It wasn't grand, it wasn't impressive, it was real. Mrs. Hadley stood waiting at the door, older now, but with the same kind eyes Elara remembered. Behind her, a small staff watched curiously. "Miss Whitcombe," Mrs. Hadley said, curtsying. "Welcome home." Home. Elara stepped down from the coach, her boots touching the rough gravel drive. In the distance, she could see the village, smoke rising from chimneys. Beyond that, farmland and forest and sky. No glittering ballrooms, no cruel laughter, no one to perform for. She smiled, genuinely, freely, for the second time in her life. "Thank you, Mrs. Hadley. I think this is exactly where I need to be." That night, alone in a bedroom that smelled of lavender and old wood, Elara stood at the window looking out at the darkness. Somewhere in that darkness were people who needed help, land that needed managing, a life that needed building. Somewhere far away, in a London ballroom, the Duke of Ashford was probably dancing with someone beautiful and forgettable. But here, in the wild country where survival mattered more than status, Elara Whitcombe was about to discover what she was truly made of. And when the time came, when her past came looking for her, as she somehow knew it would, she would be ready. Not as the woman no one chose, but as the woman who chose herself. The first morning at Thornwick, Elara woke to silence so complete it felt like drowning. No street vendors shouting, no carriages rattling past, no servants bustling in hallways, just wind through old stone and the distant cry of a bird she couldn't name. She dressed herself, fumbling with buttons meant for a lady's maid, and went downstairs to find Mrs. Hadley already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, kneading dough with the practiced rhythm of someone who'd never had idle hands. "You're up early, miss." Couldn't sleep. Elara hovered in the doorway, suddenly aware she had no idea what to do with herself. In London, her days had been structured down to the minute. Lessons, fittings, social calls, preparations for events she dreaded. Here, the emptiness stretched ahead like uncharted territory. "Well, don't just stand there. You want breakfast? You'll help make it." Elara blinked. I don't know how." Mrs. Hadley's hands stilled. She looked up, really looked at Elara, and something shifted in her expression. Not pity exactly, but understanding. "Then I suppose you'll learn. Grab that bowl." By the time the sun had fully risen, Elara had burned her first batch of eggs, cut her fingers slicing bread, and discovered that making tea was significantly harder than drinking it. Her hands shook from effort, her back ached, and she felt more useful than she had in years. "Better," Mrs. Hadley said, tasting the second attempt at eggs. "Not good, but better. High praise. In this house, you'll get honesty. If you want flattery, you came to the wrong place." Elara smiled, sitting down across from the housekeeper with her own plate. "Honesty is exactly what I need." They ate in comfortable silence before Mrs. Hadley pulled out a leather journal, worn and ink-stained. "Your grandfather's estate records. He was meticulous about it. Every tenant, every plot of land, every debt and asset. Been sitting here collecting dust since he passed." Elara opened it carefully. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, columns of numbers, maps sketched in margins. Her grandfather had clearly loved this land, had known every corner of it. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Depends on what you mean by bad." Mrs. Hadley poured more tea. "The land itself is good. The manor's solid, if shabby. But the tenants—" She trailed off, choosing her words. "They're struggling. Crops failed last year. The irrigation system your grandfather built is falling apart. And they're suspicious of outsiders, especially London folk who show up talking about management." "I'm not an outsider. This is my family's land." "With respect, miss, you're a stranger. Family name doesn't mean much to people who've been working this soil their whole lives and watching it fail them. Elara closed the journal. When can I meet them? Meet them? Miss, you don't just walk into the village. Mrs. Hadley, I didn't come here to hide in this manor. If I'm going to manage this estate, I need to know the people who live on it. The housekeeper studied her for a long moment. You're serious about this, aren't you? This isn't just running away. It started as running away, Elara admitted. But now I'm here, and I might as well do something worthwhile. So yes, I'm serious. Mrs. Hadley stood, dusting flour from her apron. Then we'll go tomorrow, after Sunday services. People gather at the tavern then. You'll meet most of the village in one go. And what should I expect? Skepticism, hostility, probably. These folks have been promised help before by your father's stewards, men who took their coin and did nothing. They won't trust you just because you smile and say pretty words. Good thing I'm not particularly good at pretty words. The housekeeper's mouth twitched, almost a smile. We'll see about that. That night, Elara went through her grandfather's records by candlelight, her eyes straining to read the faded ink. Tenant by tenant, farm by farm, she traced the estate's decline. The irrigation channels clogged with debris. The mill's water wheel cracked and leaking, roads washed out and never repaired. Medical care non-existent. The last doctor had left 3 years ago. No wonder they were suspicious. The Whitcombe family had abandoned them to rot while living in luxury in London. She made lists, priorities, budgets calculated from what remained of her dowry money, funds her father had given her, probably glad to be rid of the expense. It wasn't much, but it was something. Sunday morning arrived cold and gray. Elara dressed in her plainest gown, though even that felt too fine for Thornwick. Mrs. Hadley looked her over critically. You'll stand out regardless. Might as well stop trying to hide it. They walked to the village, a 15-minute trek down a rutted road that turned Elara's slippers to mud. The church was small and drafty, its congregation sparse. Elara sat in the back, trying to be inconspicuous, but she felt every eye on her during the service. Afterward, people gathered outside, talking in clusters. Children ran between adults, their laughter sharp in the cold air. An old man repaired a wagon wheel. Women traded vegetables from baskets. This was what London society never saw. Actual life, unpolished and necessary. That's her, isn't it? The voice carried on the wind. The Whitcombe girl. About time one of them showed their face. Wonder how long she'll last before running back to her fancy parties. Mrs. Hadley touched Elara's elbow. The tavern. Come on. The building was barely more than a large room with rough tables and a stone fireplace. The smell of ale and smoke hit Elara immediately. Conversation died as she entered. A man stood from a corner table, tall, weathered, maybe 40, with the build of someone who'd spent his life doing physical labor. His eyes were hard, assessing. So you're the one managing the estate now? I am. My name is Elara Whitcombe. I know who you are. Everyone knows. Question is, what do you plan to do about the mess your family left us in? That's what I'm here to discuss. May I sit? He gestured to a chair. Elara sat, aware that every person in the tavern was listening. Mrs. Hadley remained standing behind her, a silent show of support. I'm Thomas Garrett, the man said. I speak for most of the tenant farmers, so speak plain. Are you here to help, or is this another London game? I'm here to help, though I understand you have no reason to believe that. Damn right we don't. Your father sent 3 stewards in as many years. Each one promised improvements. Each one took bribes from the merchants and left us with nothing. But Elara pulled out her grandfather's journal, laying it on the table. My grandfather knew this land. I've read his records. I know about the irrigation problems, the failed crops, the mill, the roads. I know you've been abandoned. Knowing and doing are different things. I agree, which is why I'm not making promises. I'm asking questions. She looked around the room, meeting eyes that quickly looked away. What do you need most? Right now, today, what would make the biggest difference? Silence. Then a woman spoke from near the fire. The well in South Quarter ran dry last month. We're hauling water a mile each way. Children are getting sick. How much would a new well cost? Elara asked. Thomas snorted. More than you've got, I'd wager. 70 pounds at least, maybe more. Need to dig deep here. The water table's low. £70. That was one ball gown in London, 2 good horses, a week of her mother's spending. I'll have the well dug within the month. The room erupted. You can't possibly… With what money? She's lying, same as the others. Thomas held up a hand and the noise subsided. That's a big promise, Miss Whitcombe. I don't make promises I can't keep. I have funds. Not unlimited, but enough for a well. She looked at the woman who'd spoken. Give me the location. I'll bring workers from the next county if I have to. Why? The question came from an old man in the corner, his voice rough as gravel. Why should we believe you care about us? Elara could have lied, could have said something noble about duty and responsibility, but Mrs. Hadley's words echoed in her head. In this house, you'll get honesty. Because I have nowhere else to go, she said quietly. I failed in London, spectacularly. I'm unmarriageable, forgettable, everything society says a woman shouldn't be. This estate is my last chance to prove I'm worth something. So yes, I care. Maybe not for the reasons you want, but I care because your success is my success. If this land thrives, I thrive. If it fails, I fail. We're stuck with each other. The honesty landed like a stone in still water. She watched it ripple through the room, saw people glance at each other, recalculating. Thomas leaned back in his chair. All right, you get us a well in South Quarter, we'll talk about the other problems. But if you fail, if this is just more London nonsense, you'll have no one left to manage. We'll break our leases and go elsewhere. Fair enough? She stood, extending her hand. Thomas stared at it for a moment. A lady's hand, soft and uncalloused, offering to shake like a man. Then he gripped it, his handshake firm enough to make her bones creak. Don't make me regret this, he said. I won't. Walking back to the manor, Mrs. Hadley was quiet until they were out of earshot of the village. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Elara's hand still tingled from Thomas's grip. How do I actually get a well dug? You hire a drilling crew, negotiate price, secure the land rights, and pray the water table cooperates. And if I don't know how to do any of that, then you learn, fast. The next week was a brutal education. Elara wrote letters to drilling companies, received quotes that made her stomach turn, and haggled over prices with the written intensity of someone who'd never negotiated anything more serious than hat ribbons. She rode out to South Quarter, actually rode, on a horse that sensed her inexperience and took full advantage, to survey the land with the drilling foreman. Tough ground, he said, kicking at the soil. Could hit rock. Could find water in 20 feet or 200. Your best estimate? 100 feet, maybe. That'll run you 80 pounds, not 70. She didn't have 80 pounds. She had 65 after purchasing supplies for the manor and paying overdue wages to the staff. I'll get you 80, start next week. Back at the manor, she went through her belongings with the cold calculation of someone who'd discovered that survival had a price. Jewelry she'd never worn, dresses she'd never liked, books she could live without. She made an inventory and sent it to London, to Marcus Caldwell, with a note. Sell everything, quietly, send the money. His response came faster than she expected. Are you insane? Your mother will kill me. Also, yes, I'll handle it. The money arrived 10 days later, 92 pounds. Elara held the bank draft in shaking hands. It was more than she'd hoped for, less than she feared she'd need. But it was enough. The drilling crew arrived on a Monday, their equipment rattling into South Quarter like a mechanical invasion. The whole village turned out to watch. Children ran alongside the wagons. Women carried water for the workers. Men offered unsolicited advice that the foreman ignored with practiced patience. Elara was there every day, watching the drill bite into stubborn earth, watching soil turn to mud, turn to rock, turn to deeper earth. Her dresses got filthy. Her boots fell apart. She learned to read soil composition and water signs from the foreman, who warmed to her after she didn't faint when a worker's hand got caught in the machinery and she helped bandage it instead. You're all right for a lady, he said on the 4th day, wiping sweat from his face. I'm not much of a lady anymore. Good. Ladies are useless out here. On the 7th day at 93 feet, they hit water. The foreman whooped, and suddenly the whole crew was cheering. Water bubbled up through the drill hole, clear and cold. Within hours, the village had gathered, people cupping their hands to drink, children splashing each other, women already planning how the well would change their lives. Thomas Garrett found Elara standing apart from the celebration, watching. "You did it! The drilling crew did it. I just paid them." "Don't do that. Don't diminish what you accomplished." His voice was rough but not unkind. "Most people in your position would have taken the easy path. You didn't." "I didn't have an easy path available." "Maybe. But you could have done nothing. That's always an option, and it's the one most people choose." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. "The village council meets Thursday night. We'd like you there, if you're serious about this." "I am." "Then be prepared." The well was the easy part. Thursday's council meeting was held in the tavern, the same rough room that now felt slightly less hostile. 12 people gathered around pushed-together tables. Tenant farmers, the blacksmith, the tavern keeper, a woman who ran the village's unofficial school. Thomas called the meeting to order. "Miss Whitcombe's proven she's willing to invest. Now, we discuss what needs fixing and in what order." What followed was 3 hours of brutal honesty. The irrigation channels needed complete reconstruction, 200 pounds minimum. The mill required a new water wheel and structural repairs, another 100. The road to the next market town was impassable half the year, costing them trade, cost unknown. Medical care non-existent. A doctor would need housing and guaranteed income. "And we need someone who knows agriculture," said a farmer named William, his face creased with worry. "The soil's exhausted. We've been planting the same crops in the same rotation for 20 years. Yields drop every season." "What do you suggest?" Elara asked. "Don't know, that's the problem. We need expertise we don't have." She made notes until her hand cramped. The list of problems grew longer, the solutions more expensive and complicated. By the time the meeting ended, she felt like she was drowning in impossibilities misses. Hadley found her later that night, staring at the numbers by candlelight. "You look grim." "I have 62 pounds left. The irrigation alone costs 200. Even if I sell everything I own, it won't be enough." "Then you'll have to get creative." "How?" The housekeeper sat down, joints creaking. "Your grandfather didn't just throw money at problems. He partnered with people, gave tenant farmers tools and seeds on credit, took payment from harvest profits, found craftsmen willing to work for land rights instead of cash, built relationships, not just infrastructure." "I don't have time to build relationships. Winter's coming. If we don't fix the irrigation before spring planting, Rome wasn't built in a day, miss." Rome had more than 62 pounds. Despite the overwhelming odds, Elara kept working. She negotiated a deal with the blacksmith. He'd repair the mill's water wheel at cost if she secured him exclusive trade rights with the estate. She convinced 3 tenant farmers to contribute labor to the irrigation project in exchange for reduced rents. She wrote to agricultural colleges, begging for advice on soil management, and received exactly one reply from a young scholar named David Brennan, who seemed more interested in field research than professional advancement. "Your situation intrigues me," he wrote. "I'd like to visit Thornwick and assess the soil conditions myself. I require only room and board, plus access to your land for study. If my recommendations prove valuable, we can discuss further compensation." Elara responded immediately. "Come as soon as you can. We're desperate." He arrived 3 weeks later during the first real cold snap of autumn. Elara expected an elderly professor. Instead, David Brennan was perhaps 30, thin and intense, with dirt permanently embedded under his fingernails and a tendency to crouch down and examine soil at random intervals. "Fascinating," was his first word upon seeing Thornwick's fields. "Absolutely fascinating." Fascinating good or fascinating bad? Both. He scooped up a handful of earth, letting it run through his fingers. "Your soil's depleted, but the structure's still sound. With proper management, you could restore fertility within 2 growing seasons." "How?" "Crop rotation, nitrogen-fixing plants, strategic fallowing. It's not revolutionary, but it requires discipline and trust. Your tenants will have to plant what I tell them, when I tell them, and accept that some fields will produce nothing for a year." "They'll never agree to that. They're barely surviving as it is." David looked at her with eyes that had seen too many failed harvests. "Then they'll continue barely surviving until the soil gives out completely and everyone starves. Your choice. That night, another council meeting. Elara presented David's proposal, watching faces harden with every word. You want us to plant nothing? William's voice rose. My family needs to eat. Not nothing. Different crops. And the fields that lie fallow will recover. Recovery doesn't feed children. Neither does exhausted soil, David interjected. His voice was calm but unyielding. I've seen this pattern in a dozen regions. Push the land too hard and eventually it stops giving. You're at that breaking point now. And if your fancy plan fails, Thomas asked, then you're no worse off than you are now. We'd be a year behind, with families gone hungry for nothing. The argument escalated, voices overlapping in frustration and fear. These were people with everything at stake and no margin for error. Asking them to trust an outsider's theory with their survival felt impossible. Elara stood. The room quieted. What if I guaranteed the first year? Guaranteed how? If David's crop rotation fails to improve yields after one full season, I'll cover the lost income from my own funds. The silence was absolute. You don't have those funds, Thomas said carefully. I'll get them. I'll sell the London townhouse if I have to, but I believe in this. David's knowledge is exactly what we need. Why? William demanded. Why risk everything? Because half measures won't save this estate. We either commit to real change or we slowly collapse. I'd rather fail trying something new than succeed at prolonged dying. More silence. Then the woman who ran the school spoke, her voice quiet but firm. My name's Anne Fletcher. I've watched 3 families leave this village in 2 years because they couldn't make the land produce. If Miss Whitcomb's willing to risk her own money, I'm willing to risk a bad harvest. One by one, others nodded. Not all of them. Several farmers left the meeting angry and unconvinced. But enough stayed to make the plan possible. David started immediately, working with willing farmers to map out new crop patterns. Elara watched him transform from awkward scholar to passionate teacher, kneeling in fields to explain nitrogen cycles to skeptical men twice his age. She also watched him watch her, quick glances when he thought she wasn't looking, a softness in his expression that made something in her chest tighten uncomfortably. Winter came hard and early. The first snow fell in late October, heavy and unforgiving. The manor's heating was inadequate, the chimneys half-blocked. Elara learned to sleep in layers and wake before dawn to break ice in the wash basin. But the village was worse. A child died of fever in November, a little girl named Sarah, 6 years old. The funeral was small and brutal, the frozen ground so hard they could barely dig the grave. Elara stood in the cold watching Sarah's mother collapse into her husband's arms, and something crystallized in her mind. This wasn't abstract anymore. These weren't tenant farmers on a ledger. These were people whose lives depended on her decisions. She rode to the next county that afternoon through snow that turned her fingers numb and her face raw. She found the retired Dr. Marcus had mentioned in his last letter and made him an offer: a cottage, guaranteed income, and a share of any estate profits. Dr. Edmund Chase was 70, cantankerous, and missing 2 fingers from a surgery gone wrong. He looked at Elara like she was insane. Why would I leave a comfortable retirement to freeze in the countryside? Because people are dying who don't have to. Because you became a doctor to save lives, not sit by a fire waiting to die yourself. Because you're bored out of your mind and we both know it. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a harsh, barking sound. You've got nerve, I'll give you that. All right, I'll come for 3 months, trial period. If I hate it, I'm gone. Fair enough. Dr. Chase arrived a week later with 3 trunks of medical supplies and a vocabulary that could strip paint. Within days, he'd set up a clinic in a converted storage room and was terrorizing the village with examinations. Your children are malnourished, he told one mother bluntly. Feed them more protein or I'll report you for neglect. We don't have... Then talk to Miss Whitcombe. That's why she's here. Elara started a program buying eggs and milk from farmers who could spare them, distributing them to families who couldn't. It emptied her remaining funds. Marcus sent more from selling her last piece of jewelry, a pearl necklace her grandmother had given her. You're going to run out of things to sell, he wrote. I know, she wrote back, but not yet. By December, the estate had transformed from abandoned to functional. Not thriving, not even close, but functioning. The well in South Quarter was legendary now, a symbol that change was possible. The mill was half repaired. David's agricultural plan was in place for spring planting. Dr. Chase had reduced preventable deaths to near zero. And Elara had changed too. Her hands were rough with calluses. Her face was weathered from wind and sun. She'd learned to ride properly, to read financial statements, to argue with merchants, to comfort grieving mothers. The girl who'd hidden in ballroom alcoves was gone, replaced by someone harder and more substantial. But harder didn't mean invulnerable. It was Thomas who noticed she'd stopped eating regularly. He found her in the manor's study one evening, poring over accounts by lamplight, her face hollow with exhaustion. "When did you last have a meal?" "This morning, I think." He sat down across from her uninvited. "You're running yourself into the ground." "There's too much to do." "There's always too much to do. That's not an excuse to destroy yourself." His voice softened. "You matter too, you know. Not just as the lady who manages things, as a person." Elara's eyes burned. She blinked hard, refusing tears. "I can't afford to matter. If I stop moving, if I let myself feel how overwhelming this is, I'll fall apart." "Then fall apart. We'll catch you." The kindness broke something in her. She did cry then, quiet tears that she tried to hide behind her hands. Thomas didn't try to comfort her with words or touch. He just sat there, present and solid, until the storm passed. "Better?" he asked when she finally looked up. "Not really, but thank you. You know, you've done more in 3 months than anyone thought possible. You've earned the right to be imperfect." "I was already imperfect. That's why I'm here." "No. You're here because you're brave. There's a difference." That night, Elara wrote in her journal by candlelight, "I thought I came here to escape judgment. Instead, I found something harder, responsibility for lives beyond my own. In London, I was invisible and safe. Here, I matter, which means I can fail in ways that hurt more than just myself. I'm terrified, but I'm also alive in a way I never was before." 3 days before Christmas, a writer arrived from London. Not a letter, an actual person, mud-splattered and exhausted. It was Marcus. "What are you doing here?" Elara asked, meeting him in the courtyard. He dismounted, swaying with fatigue. "Couldn't write this in a letter. Your mother's cutting you off. Your father agreed. No more money, no more support. They're formally disowning you." The words should have hurt. Instead, Elara felt oddly light. All right. All right? Elara, do you understand what this means?" "It means I'm free, completely free. They can't control me anymore." Marcus grabbed her shoulders. "It also means you're alone. What you've built here, it's impressive, but it's fragile. One bad harvest, one harsh winter, and it all collapses. Without your family's backing, I'll find another way. I always do." "You're not hearing me. There's more." He hesitated, clearly dreading his next words. "The Duke of Ashford has been asking about you." Elara's blood went cold. "What?" "At parties, social events, he asks if anyone's heard from you, where you went, what you're doing. Some people think it's concern. Others think—" Marcus trailed off. "Think what?" "That he feels guilty. That maybe he realizes what he did." "I don't care what he realizes. He's nothing to me." "Are you sure?" "Because word is spreading, Elara. About what you're doing here. People are talking, and when people talk, the Duke listens." Before she could respond, Thomas appeared in the courtyard, followed by David and Dr. Chase. They'd been working on the mill repairs. Marcus looked between them and Elara, reading something in the dynamic that made his expression shift. "I see," he said quietly. "You've built a life here." "I'm trying to." "And these men are colleagues, friends, nothing more." But even as she said it, Elara knew it wasn't entirely true. She'd caught David watching her with open admiration. Thomas's protectiveness had deepened into something more complex. Even cantankerous Dr. Chase softened around her in ways he didn't with others. She wasn't invisible here. She was seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. And somewhere in London, the man who'd called her forgettable was apparently asking questions. Marcus stayed 3 days, long enough to see what Elara had built and understand why she'd never come back. On his last morning, walking him to his horse, He stopped her. Be careful. You've made yourself into someone important here, but that also makes you vulnerable. People will notice. They'll want things from you, and some of them won't have your best interests at heart. I can handle myself. I know. That's what worries me. You've forgotten how to ask for help. After he left, Elara stood in the cold, watching his horse disappear into the distance. Behind her, the manor was warm with life. Servants preparing meals, Dr. Chase arguing with a patient, David sketching crop plans at the kitchen table. This was her world now. But Marcus's warning echoed. The Duke has been asking about you. Let him ask. Let him wonder. Let him regret. She had more important things to do than think about Alexander Ashford. The first real test of David's agricultural plan came in late December, when they had to explain to skeptical farmers exactly what crops they'd be planting instead of their traditional wheat and barley. The meeting was tense. William stood up, his face red with frustration. Clover? You want me to plant clover? I can't sell clover. You'll plant clover this year to restore nitrogen, David explained patiently. Next year, your wheat yields will double. And if they don't? If my family starves waiting for your theories to prove out? Elara stood. Then I'll cover your losses, as promised. But David's methods work. I've seen the research. Research isn't food on the table. The room erupted again. Elara felt the fragile trust they'd built beginning to crack. These people had taken enormous risks based on her promises. If she failed them now, a door slammed open. Anne Fletcher stood in the entrance, her face pale. Fire, she gasped. The mill, it's on fire. Everyone ran. Elara reached the mill to find flames already consuming the new repairs, smoke billowing black against the winter sky. The water wheel they'd spent so much money fixing was ablaze, wood crackling and popping in the heat. Thomas was organizing bucket lines, but it was clearly hopeless. The mill was gone. All that work, all that money, gone in smoke. Elara stood watching her efforts burn, and for the first time since arriving at Thornwick, she let herself feel the full weight of possible failure. What if Marcus was right? What if this was all too fragile, one disaster away from collapse? David appeared beside her, his face smudged with soot. We'll rebuild. With what money? We'll find a way. We always do. Do we? Because right now it feels like everything I touch turns to ash. He grabbed her hand, bold for him, unexpected. Look at me. This isn't London. Out here we don't give up because something burns. We rebuild. That's what survival means. She looked at him, this gentle scholar who'd somehow become part of her world, and saw absolute faith in his eyes. Not in the plan. In her. Behind them, the mill collapsed inward with a groan of dying timber. Sparks shot into the night sky like dying stars. And Elara made a decision. Tomorrow, she said, her voice steady despite everything, we start rebuilding. But we rebuild it better, bigger, with stone instead of wood so it never burns again. Thomas overheard. That'll cost... I don't care what it costs. We're not just surviving anymore. We're building something that lasts. The crowd that had gathered to fight the fire stared at her. This London lady who'd somehow become their leader, standing in the snow watching their hopes burn and promising to build something better from the ashes. Thomas smiled grimly. All right then, let's build something that lasts. As the villagers dispersed, planning and arguing and already organizing for tomorrow's work, Elara stayed watching the embers glow against the dark. She'd burned her own bridges coming here. Now her mill had burned too. But fire, she was learning, didn't just destroy. Sometimes it forged. The ashes were still warm when the first stone was laid. Elara stood in the pre-dawn cold, her breath fogging the air, watching Thomas and a crew of farmers clear the mill's charred remains. Her hands were blistered from yesterday's bucket lines, her dress still reeking of smoke. But she'd been here since first light, unable to sleep while possibility smoldered. You should rest, Dr. Chase said, appearing beside her with his medical bag. He'd been treating minor burns all night. I'll rest when we have a mill again. Stubbornness isn't a virtue when it leads to collapse. Neither is quitting, he grunted, which she'd learned was his version of approval. At least eat something. Can't rebuild on an empty stomach. She hadn't eaten since the fire, hadn't thought about it. But when Mrs. Hadley pressed bread and cheese into her hands, she forced herself to swallow, tasting ash on everything. By noon, they'd cleared enough debris to reveal the foundation, cracked but salvageable. David arrived with drawings he'd sketched overnight, a new design that incorporated stone walls and a more efficient wheel placement. "This will cost everything you have left," he said, spreading the papers across a makeshift table. "And probably more." "Then I'll find more." "How? You've sold everything. Your family's cut you off, unless you're planning to rob a bank." "I'll take a loan against the estate's future profits." Thomas looked up from where he was measuring foundation stones. "No bank will lend to a woman. Not for this amount." "Then I'll find one that will." "Elara." David's voice was gentle but firm. "Be realistic. The numbers don't work. Even if you could get a loan, the repayment terms would cripple the estate for years." She stared at the drawings, at the beautiful impossibility of them, and felt something crack inside her chest. He was right. They were all right. She'd been running on will and desperation for months, but will didn't pay for stone and iron. Desperation didn't rebuild mills. "So what do you suggest? We give up?" "I suggest we rebuild smaller, wood instead of stone, repair what we can afford, not what we dream about." "And when it burns again?" "We rebuild again. That's how the world works." "Not my world, not anymore." She gathered the drawings, rolling them carefully. "I'm going to London." The words fell into silence like stones into still water. "London?" Mrs. Hadley's voice was sharp. "What in heaven's name for?" "Money. If banks won't lend to me, I'll find investors, people who understand what we're building here." "And if you can't?" Thomas asked. "Then I'll sell myself to the highest bidder." The words came out harder than she intended. "I'll marry whoever will take me and use the dowry to save this place." David's face went white. "You can't be serious. Watch me." She left that afternoon, despite protests and concerns, and Mrs. Hadley's dire warnings about traveling alone in winter. The journey to London took 4 days through snow and ice, the coach nearly overturning twice. Elara spent the miles rehearsing arguments, preparing for battles she wasn't sure she could win. London hit her like a physical blow, the noise, the crowds, the overwhelming press of people who moved without seeing each other. She'd forgotten how suffocating it felt, how small she'd been here. Marcus met her at his townhouse, his face a mixture of relief and alarm. "You look terrible." "I feel worse. I need your help." Over tea that she was too anxious to drink, she explained everything: the fire, the rebuild, the desperate need for capital. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. "How much do you need?" £300, maybe more." He nearly choked on his tea. "Elara, that's impossible. I'd give it to you if I had it, but I'm not asking you to give it. I'm asking you to help me find people who will invest. There must be someone in London with money and sense who can see the opportunity here. In a failing estate run by an unmarried woman in the middle of nowhere, you're asking me to find a unicorn. Then find me a unicorn, or find me a husband rich enough and stupid enough to marry me for my charming personality and business acumen." Marcus set down his cup carefully. "There's a third option you're not considering." "What?" "Go to the Duke." The name hit her like a slap. "Absolutely not. Hear me out. He's been asking about you for months. He clearly feels some level of guilt." "I don't care about his guilt. I don't care about him at all." "Maybe you should, because he has the money you need and the connections to make this work." "One conversation, Elara. Swallow your pride for one conversation, and you might save everything you've built." "My pride is the only thing I have left that's worth keeping." "Is it worth more than Thornwick? Than the people depending on you?" The question was a knife between her ribs. She wanted to say yes, to storm out and find another way. But the truth was colder and harder. She'd run out of options. And the people of Thornwick didn't care about her pride. They cared about survival. "If I do this," she said slowly, "if I go to him, I do it on my terms. I'm not begging. I'm not apologizing for existing. I'm offering a business proposition. He may not see it that way. Then he can go to hell." Finding the Duke proved easier than she expected. He was at his club, Marcus discovered with a few discreet inquiries. Elara, dressed in her least smoke-damaged gown, pinned up her hair, and tried not to think about the last time she'd seen Alexander Ashford. Forgettable. The word still stung, even after everything. The club didn't allow women past the entrance hall, so she sent in her card and waited, feeling like a beggar at the gates. Minutes crawled by. She was about to leave when footsteps approached. He looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, commanding, those winter storm eyes that missed nothing. But something was different in the way he moved, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. "Miss Whitcombe." His voice was carefully neutral. "This is unexpected. I need to speak with you, privately. The club doesn't permit. I know what the club permits. Find somewhere else, or we can have this conversation here in front of everyone." A flicker of something crossed his face. Surprise, maybe respect. He gestured toward the door. "My carriage." They sat across from each other in the enclosed space, the leather seat suddenly feeling too small, too intimate. Elara focused on her hands, on the plan she'd rehearsed, refusing to let him see how much this cost her. "I'm managing my family's estate in Thornwick," she began, keeping her voice level. "We've made significant improvements, new well, medical care, agricultural reforms, but we had a fire. The mill burned. To rebuild properly, I need capital. And you came to me? I'm asking everywhere. You're simply the most likely to have the funds available. Why would I invest in a failing estate run by—" He stopped himself. "Run by an unmarriageable, forgettable woman? Yes, I remember. But I'm not asking for charity. I'm offering investment opportunity. Thornwick has potential. Good land, dedicated tenants, strategic location. With proper infrastructure, it could be profitable within 3 years. You're asking me to gamble £300 on a maybe. I'm asking you to see past my face to the actual value of the proposition. But if you can't do that, then I've wasted both our time." She moved to leave, but his hand shot out, not quite touching her. "Wait. Why? So you can reject me again? I've had enough humiliation from you to last a lifetime. I deserve that." His voice was quiet now, stripped of its usual certainty. "I deserve much worse. What I said at the ball? I don't care what you said. I don't care about apologies or guilt or whatever emotion you're currently performing. I care about Thornwick. If you can help, help. If not, let me go." He studied her for a long moment, and she forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. Let him see what his words had forged, someone harder, colder, immune to his charm. £300, he said finally. "I'll provide it, but not as an investment." Her stomach sank. "Then as what?" "As penance. No repayment necessary, no conditions." "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "Because I don't want your pity money. I want respect or nothing." "It's not pity. Then what is it? Guilt? Trying to buy your way out of being the man who destroyed me in public?" She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Keep your money, Your Grace. I'll find another way." She opened the carriage door, stepping out into the cold London street. Behind her, she heard him exit as well. "Elara, wait." The use of her first name stopped her. She turned slowly. He stood there, his composure cracking for the first time. "I was wrong. About you. About everything. I've spent months trying to understand why I said what I did, and the truth is there's no good reason. I was cruel because I could be, because everyone was watching and I wanted to seem clever, and I destroyed something I didn't even realize had value until it was gone." "A pretty speech. Did you rehearse it?" "Every word. Because I knew I'd only get one chance to say this to you." He took a step closer. "I want to help, not because I pity you, but because I admire what you've built. Because I've spent months hearing stories about the woman who left London society and rebuilt a dying estate through sheer force of will. That woman deserves support, not charity. So yes, take the money. Make it a loan if you need to. Charge me interest if it makes you feel better. But don't let your pride destroy what you've created." Elara wanted to hate him, wanted to throw his words back in his face and walk away triumphant. But standing there in the street, she had to face an uncomfortable truth. He was right. Her pride would hurt Thornwick more than accepting help would hurt her. "A loan," she said finally. £300 at 5% interest, paid back over 10 years from estate profits. "Agreed." In writing, legal documents, no special treatment, no forgiveness if I fail. Whatever you need. She nodded stiffly. Have your solicitor draw up the papers. I'll review them tomorrow. Elara, Miss Whitcombe. We're not friends, Your Grace. We're not anything. This is business, nothing more. She walked away before he could respond, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd done it. She'd secured the money. So why did she feel like she'd just made a terrible mistake? The legal documents were ready the next day. Marcus reviewed them with her, finding nothing objectionable in the terms. The Duke had been scrupulously fair. No hidden clauses, no leverage points, just a straightforward loan at reasonable interest. He's trying, Marcus said quietly. You have to give him that. I don't have to give him anything. She signed the papers, collected the bank draft, and left London the same afternoon. The entire trip had taken 6 days. 6 days away from Thornwick felt like an eternity. But when her coach pulled up to the manor, something was wrong. The village was too quiet. No smoke from chimneys, no children playing, just an eerie, watchful silence. Thomas met her at the door, his face grim. We have a problem. Inside, gathered in the manor's dining room, were faces she didn't recognize. Hard men in expensive coats, accompanied by someone who made her blood run cold. Lord Pembroke, the man who'd called her unmarriageable at the ball, who'd started the whole cascade of humiliation. Miss Whitcombe. His smile was oily. How lovely to see you again. What are you doing here? I've come to discuss a business matter. You see, I've recently acquired several debts associated with this estate. Old loans your grandfather took out before he died. Loans that are now overdue. With interest, you owe approximately £500. The number hit her like a physical blow. That's impossible. I've been through all the records, not all of them, apparently. He produced documents, spreading them across the table. These were held by a bank in Edinburgh. They sold the debt to me last month. Perfectly legal, I assure you. Elara's hands shook as she examined the papers. They looked legitimate, bore her grandfather's signature, detailed loans taken for improvements 30 years ago. But something felt wrong. Why would you buy old estate debt? Let's just say I have an interest in acquiring land in this region. And when I heard about your little project here, your noble attempt to save the unwashed masses, I thought I'd offer assistance. By calling in debts? By offering a solution. You clearly can't pay £500. But I'm willing to forgive the entire debt in exchange for one thing, transfer of the estate ownership to me. The room went silent. You want me to give you Thornwick? It's a generous offer. You've done admirable work here, but you're a woman, alone, out of your depth. Let someone with actual resources take over. I'll even keep you on as a manager if you'd like. Give you a salary, a comfortable position. Elara looked at the papers, at Pembroke's smug face, at Thomas standing in the corner with his fists clenched. This was why banks had refused her. This was why her father had been so willing to let her come here. Someone had been maneuvering in the shadows, waiting for her to build something worth taking. How did you know I'd come here? She asked quietly. Your mother's quite talkative after a few glasses of wine. She mentioned your little exile. I simply did my research and waited. And if I refuse? Then I call in the debt. You have 30 days to pay, or I take the estate through legal action. Either way, it becomes mine. This way is just less unpleasant for everyone. She could feel Thomas's eyes on her, could sense his rage and helplessness. Dr. Chase stood near the window, his face carved from stone. David wasn't there, probably still out in the fields, unaware of the trap closing around them. Elara had £300 in her reticule. Not nearly enough. And even if she sold everything, borrowed more, destroyed herself financially, she'd never raise £500 in 30 days. Pembroke had won, unless she changed the game entirely. I need time to consider, she said. You have until tomorrow morning. I'm staying at the tavern. He stood, gathering his papers. I do hope you'll be reasonable, Miss Whitcombe. You've worked so hard. It would be a shame to lose everything over stubbornness. After he left, Thomas exploded. That bastard planned this from the start. He's been buying up debt all over the region, forcing people out, consolidating land. I know. So what are we going to do? Elara stared at the table where Pembroke's papers had been. 30 days, £500. Impossible odds, but impossible was becoming her specialty. We fight. With what? We don't have the money. Money isn't the only weapon. She turned to Mrs. Hadley. Those debts, did my grandfather really take them out? He might have. Times were hard back then, but Archibald Whitcombe was meticulous about records. If he'd had outstanding debt, he would have documented it. Then we prove the debts are fraudulent. We find the original records, the actual contracts, anything that shows these papers are forgeries. And if they're not forgeries, Dr. Chase asked, then we find another way, but we don't surrender. Not to him, not to anyone. The next 24 hours were a blur of searching. They tore through the manor's records room, through boxes and trunks that hadn't been opened in decades. Elara read until her eyes burned, cross-referencing dates and signatures, building a timeline of her grandfather's financial dealings. And slowly, a picture emerged. The loans were real, but they'd been paid off 20 years ago. She found the receipts, yellowed with age, bearing the bank's stamp of satisfaction. Somehow, the debt had been resurrected, the satisfied loans repackaged and sold as if they'd never been paid. That's fraud, Thomas said when she showed him the evidence. Yes, but proving it in court will take months, maybe years, and we don't have months. She sat back, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. They had proof, but proof was useless without time to use it. David burst into the room, his face flushed from running. Elara, there are men in the fields. Pembroke's men. They're surveying the land, marking boundaries, acting like they already own it. They're intimidating the tenants, showing them resistance is futile. Elara stood, swaying slightly. When had she last slept? Where's Anne Fletcher? The school. Why? Because we need witnesses. Legal, documented witnesses to what's happening here. If Pembroke's men are trespassing, we document everything. Every conversation, every threat, every illegal action. To what end? Dr. Chase demanded. You said yourself we don't have time for legal battles. No, but we have time for scandal. She looked around at the people who'd become her family, who'd trusted her with their futures. Pembroke wants this land? He's going to have to take it in front of the whole country. And he's going to have to explain why he's using fraudulent debt to do it. Thomas smiled slowly. You're going to expose him. I'm going to make him radioactive. No gentleman wants to be known as the man who swindled a woman out of her estate using forged papers. It'll destroy his reputation. He won't care if he gets the land. Then we make sure he doesn't get the land. Not without a fight that costs him everything. Over the next week, Elara built her case. She wrote to newspapers, to members of parliament, to anyone who might care about a lord using legal chicanery to steal from a woman. She documented every instance of Pembroke's men harassing tenants. She gathered statements from farmers he'd swindled in other counties. And she wrote to the Duke. The letter was brief, clinical. I'm enclosing evidence of fraud perpetrated by Lord Pembroke. As a member of the House of Lords, you have standing to bring this before Parliament. I'm not asking for help. I'm offering you the opportunity to do what's right. She didn't know if he'd respond, didn't know if he'd care. But she sent it anyway, because she was out of options and running out of time. Pembroke came to the manor on the 25th day, his patience clearly wearing thin. You're out of time, Miss Whitcombe. Sign over the estate or face legal action. I have evidence your debts are fraudulent, paid in full 20 years ago. His smile didn't waver. Then present it in court. Take a year to fight me while I drain every penny you have in legal fees. I have 10 solicitors. How many do you have? 1. But I also have something you don't, the truth. And I've shared that truth with some very interested parties. Meaning? Meaning 3 newspapers are printing stories tomorrow about a lord using forged documents to steal land. Your name features prominently. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. You're bluffing. Am I? You're welcome to wait and see, but I suspect your fellow lords won't appreciate the scrutiny you're about to bring on all of them. Fraud investigations tend to spread, uncover all sorts of interesting connections. You're threatening me? I'm promising you. Sign a document acknowledging the debts are paid, walk away from this estate, and the stories won't run. Keep pushing, and I'll make sure everyone from London to Edinburgh knows exactly what you are. Pembroke's face darkened. You stupid girl. You think scandal will stop me? I'll bury you. I'll make sure you never... The door opened. Marcus stood there, but he wasn't alone. The Duke of Ashford stepped into the manor, dressed for travel, his face set in an expression Elara had never seen before. Cold, dangerous fury. "Lord Pembroke," he said quietly, "I received some disturbing information about your business practices. As it happens, the House of Lords takes a dim view of fraud, especially when it involves forged documents and stolen land." Pembroke stood, his composure fracturing. "Your Grace, this is a private matter." "No, it's a criminal matter. I've brought it before the Ethics Committee. There will be an investigation, and based on the evidence Miss Whitcombe provided, I expect you'll be expelled from the Lords and face charges." "You can't prove anything." "Actually, we can." The Duke produced a folder. "We have the original debt satisfaction documents. We have testimony from the Edinburgh Bank about how those debts were misrepresented when sold. We have witness statements from tenants you've threatened. And we have 3 lords willing to testify that you attempted similar schemes on their estates." Elara stared at him. He'd done more than just bring evidence. He'd built an entire case. Pembroke looked between them, calculating. "What do you want?" "Sign a legal document releasing all claims to this estate," Elara said. "Leave Thornwick and never return. Do that, and the criminal charges might be reduced." "Might be? I'm not making any promises, but it's better than the alternative." 20 minutes later, Pembroke signed the papers, his hand shaking with rage. He left without another word, his men following like whipped dogs. When the door closed behind them, Elara allowed herself to breathe. "Thank you," she said to the Duke. "I told you I wanted to help. You gave me the opportunity." "You didn't have to go this far." "Yes, I did." He looked at her directly. No performance, no charm. "I've been trying to figure out how to make things right between us. And I realize the answer isn't grand gestures or money. It's showing up when you need someone and doing the work. So I did the work." Marcus cleared his throat. "I should check on the tenants, let them know the threat's gone." He left, giving them privacy neither had asked for. Elara busied herself gathering papers, avoiding the Duke's eyes. "You've built something remarkable here," he said. "I've built what I needed to survive. It's more than that. You've changed these people's lives, given them hope. That takes more than survival instinct. Why are you here, really?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I can't stop thinking about you, about what I did, about who you were and who you've become. And I know I have no right to any of your time or consideration, but I needed you to know. I see you now. I see exactly how extraordinary you are." The words should have felt like victory. Instead, they felt like pressure, like one more demand on her already depleted reserves. "I'm not the same person you humiliated at that ball." "I know. You're better, stronger. Everything I pretended to value but never actually understood." "So what? You want forgiveness, absolution?" "I want a chance, not to go back, not to erase what I did, but to move forward, to be someone worthy of knowing you." Before she could respond, shouting erupted outside. Thomas's voice, raised in alarm. They ran to the window. In the distance, near the village, smoke was rising again. Not the mill this time. The school. Anne Fletcher's school was on fire. Elara didn't think. She ran, the Duke behind her, both of them sprinting through snow toward the growing flames. By the time they reached the building, villagers were already fighting the fire. But the structure was old, dry timber that burned like kindling. "Where's Anne?" Elara screamed. "Inside," someone shouted back. "She went in for the children's books, wouldn't leave them." Elara was moving before anyone could stop her, into smoke and heat and darkness. She heard the Duke calling her name, heard other voices shouting, but all she could think was Anne, the woman who'd been first to trust her, was dying because of books. She found her near the back, collapsed on the floor, surrounded by burning shelves. Elara grabbed her under the arms, dragging her toward what she hoped was the door. Heat seared her lungs. Smoke blinded her. Her dress was smoking, burning. Hands grabbed her from behind. The Duke, his face blackened with soot, pulling them both toward light and air. They burst through the doorway seconds before the roof collapsed inward. Elara coughed until she tasted blood, her hands blistered and raw. Beside her, Anne gasped for air while Dr. Chase worked on her with grim efficiency. The Duke stood over her, his fine clothes ruined, his face a mixture of terror and something else she couldn't name. "You could have died," he said hoarsely. "So could she." "That's not—" He stopped, seeming to realize the futility of arguing. "You're insane. Brave and insane. That's becoming my specialty." The fire was extinguished, but the school was destroyed. "Anne would recover, Doctor," Chase said, "but she'd be weak for weeks. And the children had nowhere to learn." Standing in the smoking ruins, watching everything she'd built continue to burn, despite every effort to save it, Elara felt something inside her shift. She was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of one crisis after another. Tired of being strong when all she wanted was to fall apart. The Duke found her that night, sitting alone in the manor's library. "We'll rebuild the school," he said. "I'll fund it. No loan, no conditions, just build it." "Why?" "Because watching you run into that fire made me realize something. You don't just survive, Elara. You save people. And someone needs to save you for once." She looked at him. This man who'd destroyed her, who'd somehow become entangled in her new life, who kept showing up when she least expected and most needed it. "I don't know how to let people save me." "Then learn. Because you can't do this alone anymore. And you don't have to." Outside, she could hear the village settling into night. Tomorrow, they'd start rebuilding the school. The day after, more problems would emerge. This was her life now, constant crisis, constant effort, constant risk. But sitting in the firelight with someone who finally saw her, who'd proven through action rather than words that he understood what she was fighting for, Elara felt something she hadn't allowed herself in months. Not hope, exactly, not trust, but possibility. And in the darkness of Thornwick, surrounded by ash and promise, the man who'd called her forgettable knelt beside her chair and took her scorched hands in his. "Tell me what you need," he said. And for the first time since leaving London, Elara didn't have an answer. She didn't answer him that night. Couldn't. The question sat between them like something physical. "What do you need?" And Elara had no idea how to respond because no one had ever asked her that before. Not sincerely. Not without expecting her to minimize herself into something manageable. The Duke, Alexander, though she still couldn't bring herself to use his first name, didn't push. He simply sat with her in the library until the fire burned low, the silence comfortable in a way that surprised them both. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. "I'm staying in the village, at the tavern. If you decide you have an answer, you know where to find me." After he left, Elara stared at her bandaged hands, feeling the burn beneath the gauze. Dr. Chase had wrapped them tight, muttering about foolish women and death wishes. But she'd do it again. Would run into fire 100 times for people who mattered. The question was whether she'd let anyone do the same for her. Morning came too early. Elara woke to find Mrs. Hadley at her bedside with tea, and a look that said she knew exactly what had happened in the library. "The Duke's already at the school site," the housekeeper said. "Been there since dawn with a crew of workers he brought from London. Paid them extra to travel overnight." "He what?" "You heard me. Now drink your tea and get dressed. People are asking for you." The village was transformed. Where yesterday had been smoking ruins, today showed the skeleton of something new. Alexander had brought not just workers but architects, materials, plans already drawn. The new school would be larger than the old one, built of stone with proper ventilation and a real fireplace. He stood in the middle of the chaos, sleeves rolled up, covered in dust, arguing with a foreman about beam placement. When he saw Elara, his face shifted. Relief, uncertainty, hope all flashing across it before settling into careful neutrality. "You're up. How are your hands?" "They've been better." "What is all this?" "A school. You need one, so we're building it." "Without asking me?" "Would you have said yes if I'd asked?" She wanted to be angry, wanted to accuse him of overstepping, of taking control. But looking at the villagers already gathering to help, at Anne Fletcher sitting in a chair with tears streaming down her face, Elara couldn't find the anger. "You should have asked." "You're right. I'm sorry. I can stop if—" "Don't you dare. But next time, we discuss it first." Something in his expression eased. "Next time. I can work with that." Thomas appeared, carrying timber. He nodded at Alexander with grudging respect. Your Grace knows his way around a building site. Surprised me. I designed half the structures on my estate, Alexander said. Got tired of paying architects who'd never swung a hammer. Useful skill for a duke? Useful skill for anyone who wants to build something that lasts. The two men looked at each other, some kind of understanding passing between them that made Elara feel like an outsider in her own crisis. She left them to their work and found David in the fields, checking on winter wheat planted according to his rotation plan. It's growing, he said without preamble, his voice tight with suppressed excitement. Look at the color, the density, it's actually working. She knelt beside him, running her fingers over the small green shoots. After months of skepticism and doubt, here was proof. The soil could recover, the land could heal. You were right. We were right. You believed in it when no one else did. He turned to her, his expression more open than usual. The Duke's building a school. I noticed. He's also been talking to the tenant farmers, offering to fund irrigation repairs. No conditions, he said. Just wants to help. And what do you think about that? David was quiet for a moment, pulling up a weed with careful precision. I think he's trying to buy his way into your life, and I think it might be working. David, no, let me finish. I'm not blind, Elara. I see how he looks at you. Hell, I see how Thomas looks at you, how that artist who visited last month couldn't stop sketching your profile. You've become something here. Someone people notice, someone who matters. And now you have to decide what to do with that. I didn't come here to be noticed. I know. You came here to hide, but you can't hide anymore, and you need to figure out what you actually want instead of just reacting to what other people want from you. The words hit harder than she expected because they were true. For months she'd been in survival mode, putting out fires, solving crises, never stopping long enough to ask herself what came after survival. What do you want? She asked quietly. He smiled, sad and knowing. For you to be happy, even if that's not with me. David, it's all right. I knew from the start I wasn't the one you'd choose. I just wanted to help build something good. And we did. Whatever happens next, we did that. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees, and walked back toward the village, leaving Elara alone in the field with winter wheat and questions she didn't want to answer. The school was finished in 2 weeks. 2 weeks of relentless work, of the entire village coming together in a way Elara had never seen. Women brought food, men brought labor, children hauled water and gathered stones. And Alexander was there every day, working alongside them, earning respect through calluses and sweat rather than title. She watched him one afternoon, hammering roofing nails with Thomas, the two of them arguing good-naturedly about technique. This wasn't the man who'd humiliated her at the ball. That man had been performing, playing a role. This one was real, flawed, trying too hard sometimes, but genuinely committed to making things right. It scared her how much she was starting to believe in him. The night before the school's opening, Anne Fletcher hosted a dinner at the tavern, a celebration for everyone who'd helped rebuild. Elara tried to beg off, claiming exhaustion, but Mrs. Hadley physically pushed her out the door. You can't hide from your own success. Go, eat, be human for once. The tavern was packed, loud with conversation and laughter. Someone had brought a fiddle. Children ran between tables. It felt like a different world from the tense, suspicious gathering when she'd first arrived. Thomas raised a glass when she entered. To Miss Whitcombe, who came here running from failure and somehow convinced us we could succeed. The crowd erupted in cheers. Elara felt her face burn. I didn't do anything special. You all did the work. You gave us someone worth working for, Anne said, her voice still hoarse from smoke inhalation. That's more than special. That's everything. Alexander was there, sitting at a corner table with Dr. Chase and Marcus, who'd apparently arrived that afternoon. He didn't join the toast, but watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Later, when the party had devolved into dancing and the fiddle player was 3 drinks deep in questionable timing, he found her outside where she'd escaped for air. Too much celebration? Too much everything. She leaned against the tavern wall, looking up at stars that were clearer here than they had ever been in London. I'm not used to people being proud of me. You should be. What you've built here, it's extraordinary. Stop saying that. Why? It's true. Because every time you say it, I want to believe you. And I don't know if I can trust that impulse. He moved closer, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cold air. What would it take? For you to trust me? I don't know. Time, maybe. Proof that this isn't just guilt or fascination with the woman who told you off. That you actually see me, not just the idea of me. I see you. I see someone who ran into a burning building to save books, who sold everything she owned to dig a well for strangers, who stands in fields at dawn checking on wheat like it's made of diamonds. I see you, Elara. Every imperfect, stubborn, brilliant part of you. She turned to face him. In the moonlight, his face was open, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen at any London ball. Why now? After months of me being gone, why suddenly care? Because I'm an idiot who needed you to leave before I understood what I'd lost. Because watching you walk out of that ballroom was the first time in my life I felt genuine regret instead of just performing it. Because I spent months pretending I didn't care, and it nearly destroyed me. That's not my problem. No, it's mine. And I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm just asking you to let me prove I'm worth a second chance. Before she could respond, a scream cut through the night. They ran toward the sound, finding a crowd gathered near the new mill foundation. Someone had vandalized it, paint splashed across the stones, obscene words carved into timbers, and pinned to the center beam, a note, London Whore. Take your Duke and leave before someone gets hurt. The crowd went silent. Elara felt every eye on her, felt the weight of judgment and resentment she'd thought she'd escaped. Thomas picked up the note, his face dark with fury. Who did this? No one answered. I said who did this? Does it matter? William's voice came from the back of the crowd. They said what half the village is thinking. She comes here with her grand plans, changes everything, and now brings a duke sniffing around like she's better than us. That's not fair, Anne protested. She's done nothing but help. Help herself to our gratitude. Help herself to a duke who'll probably take over the whole estate once she's hooked him properly. William stepped forward. This isn't about improvement anymore. It's about her using us to make herself important. Elara felt the words like blows. After everything, the well, the mill, the school, the medical care, they still didn't trust her. Still saw her as an outsider playing at nobility. If that's what you think, she said quietly, then I've wasted both our time. She walked away, ignoring the calls behind her, ignoring Alexander trying to follow. She walked until she reached the manor, until she could lock herself in her room and finally let the tears come. She'd tried so hard, given everything she had, and it still wasn't enough. A knock came an hour later. She ignored it. Elara, it's Anne, please open the door. Against her better judgment, she did. Anne stood there with Mrs. Hadley and 3 other women from the village. William's an idiot, Anne said without preamble. And a drunk one tonight. Most of the village doesn't agree with him. Some do, though. Some will always doubt. That's human nature. But the rest of us see what you've done. We see how you've changed our lives, and we're not letting one angry man's resentment erase that. Mrs. Hadley pushed into the room. Besides, whoever left that note doesn't represent this village. They represent fear. Fear that things are changing too fast, that outsiders will ruin what we've built. But you're not an outsider anymore. You're one of us. Am I? Because it doesn't feel that way. You want to know how I know you're one of us? Anne sat on the bed, taking Elara's bandaged hands. Because you're here crying instead of running back to London. A year ago, the woman who left that ballroom would have given up at the first sign of resistance. But you're not her anymore. You're the woman who fights. So fight. The other women nodded, and Elara saw the truth in their faces. They believed in her. Not all of Thornwick, maybe, but enough of it to matter. What do I do about the vandalism? We find who did it, Mrs. Hadley said grimly, and we make it clear that attacking you means attacking all of us. They left her to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Elara sat by the window, watching moonlight on snow, trying to separate her feelings about Alexander from her feelings about Thornwick, about the life she was building. She told herself she came here to escape. But somewhere along the way, escape had become purpose. And now that purpose was threatened by the very thing she'd been running from, the possibility of being wanted. Morning brought clarity in the form of Dr. Chase, who barged into her room without knocking. "Get dressed. We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind where 3 tenant families are packing to leave. They heard about last night, think the village is turning against you, and don't want to be here when it collapses." Elara dressed quickly, following him to the village square where Thomas was trying to convince a wagon full of belongings to stay put. "It's not safe anymore," the farmer, Jacob, was saying. "First Pembroke, then the fires. Now this. We can't risk our children on someone else's fight." "This is your fight too," Thomas argued. "Your land, your futures, built on her money and his influence." Jacob gestured toward Alexander, who stood apart from the argument but clearly listening. "When they leave, and they will leave, where does that put us?" Elara stepped forward. "You're right." Everyone stopped talking. "You're right to be worried. You're right that this is built partly on outside support. And you're right that nothing's guaranteed." She looked at each face, at families she'd come to know, to care about. "But here's what I can promise. I'm not leaving. Not if the Duke leaves. Not if every penny runs out. Not if the whole village turns against me. This is my home now, and I'll keep fighting for it until I have nothing left to fight with." "Why should we believe you?" "Because I've already lost everything once. I know what it feels like to be rejected by the world I thought I belonged to. And I'd rather die here, building something real, than go back to being nothing there." Silence. Then Jacob's wife spoke up. "You mean that? You'd stay even if we all left?" "I'd stay if I was the only person left in Thornwick, because this place gave me something London never could, a reason to matter. And I'm not giving that up." The families looked at each other. Slowly, Jacob started unloading his wagon. "All right, we'll stay. But you need to deal with whoever's trying to drive you out. We can't keep living in fear." Agreed. That afternoon, Elara called a village meeting. Not a council meeting, a full village assembly. Every adult who could make it gathered in the half-finished mill where everyone could see the vandalism still staining the stones. She stood on a raised platform, looking out at faces both friendly and hostile, and made a choice. "Someone in this village wants me gone. They've made that clear, so I'm going to save them the trouble of subterfuge and give them a direct path." She pulled out a document she'd spent the morning preparing. "This is a charter. It transfers management of the estate from me to an elected council of tenant representatives. You'll have real power, budgets, planning, decisions. I'll still own the land legally, but you'll control how it's used." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Why would you do that?" Thomas asked. "Because I'm tired of people thinking I'm here to control you. And because this was never about power for me. It was about building something that works. If you don't trust my authority, then take it. Prove you can do better. I'll gladly step aside." "And if we fail?" William asked, his voice skeptical but less hostile. "Then we fail together. As equals, not as lady and tenants." Alexander moved forward, his expression unreadable. "Elara, think about what you're doing. Once you give up control, I never had control. Not really. I had money and desperation. They had knowledge and labor. This just makes it official." He stared at her, and she saw the moment he understood. This was a test. For him, for the village, for herself. Could she build something worth keeping if she stopped trying to control every piece of it? The vote happened that night, 37 in favor of the charter, 8 against. The village would govern itself, with Elara as a member, not a ruler. William approached her after, his face conflicted. "I still think you're trouble, but you've got guts. I'll give you that. High praise from you. Don't let it go to your head." But others were more generous. Anne hugged her. Thomas shook her hand with something like awe. Dr. Chase muttered about foolish nobility, but looked pleased. And David caught her eye from across the room, nodding with quiet approval. Alexander waited until the crowd dispersed before approaching. "That was either brilliant or insane." "Why not both?" "Because you just gave away everything you fought for." "No. I gave away the burden of fighting alone. There's the difference." She looked at him directly. "You asked what I need. This is it. Not someone to save me or control things for me, Someone who understands that real strength isn't holding on. It's knowing when to let go. He was quiet for a long moment. I'm not sure I know how to do that. Then learn. Because if you want any kind of future here, with me or this village or anything we're building, you need to understand we're equals or we're nothing. Equals. I can work with that. Can you? Because I need to know this isn't just another performance. That when things get hard or boring or I'm not the fascinating project anymore, you won't disappear. I'm not going anywhere. Prove it. How? She pulled out a second document, one she'd been carrying since London, unsigned. This is your loan agreement for the mill money. It has a clause about forgiveness if circumstances prevent repayment. I'm not calling in that debt. I know, but I need you to change the terms. Make it a partnership agreement instead. Equal stake, equal risk. If this estate succeeds, you benefit. If it fails, you lose everything you've invested. Same as me. He took the document, reading it carefully. You want me to gamble my fortune on Thornwick's success? I want you to prove you believe in what we're building here. Not just in me as some romantic idea, but in this place, these people, this work. Put your money where your declarations are. Alexander looked at her, at the document, at the village visible through the mill's open walls. Then he pulled out a pen. Where do I sign? They spent the next week restructuring everything. Legal documents, financial arrangements, power distributions. Alexander proved surprisingly good at navigating the complexities, his years in Parliament making him fluent in contracts and negotiations. But more than that, he proved willing to listen. When the village council, newly elected, Thomas as reluctant chairman, pushed back on his ideas, he didn't pull rank. He argued his case and accepted when he lost votes. You're actually enjoying this, Elara observed one evening, watching him debate irrigation channel placement with William. I am. At my estate, everyone just agrees with me because I'm the Duke. Here, they tell me when I'm being an idiot. It's refreshing. You were being an idiot about the channel placement. I know that now. William made excellent points about drainage patterns. She laughed, surprising herself. When had laughing become easy again? The school opened on a bright February morning, Anne standing at the door to welcome 23 children ranging from 5 to 14. Some had never attended any school before. Others had been taught by parents with limited education. All of them looked at the new building with awe. Elara watched from the back as Anne began the first lesson, not reading or arithmetic, but a discussion about what the children wanted to learn and why. The old Anne would have followed a rigid curriculum. This Anne had learned the same lesson Elara had. People support what they help create. You did this, Alexander said, standing beside her. We all did. Stop deflecting. You started it. The well, the mill, the medical care, the agriculture reforms, all of it came from you refusing to accept how things were. And look how many times it almost fell apart. But it didn't. That's what matters. Outside, the first spring planting was beginning. David's rotation plan was in full effect now. Fields that had been fallow, showing new growth. Others planted with nitrogen-fixing crops that would restore the soil. It would take years to see full results, but the early signs were promising. Marcus arrived that afternoon with news from London. Pembroke's been formally censured by the House of Lords. He'll likely face criminal charges for the fraud. Your evidence was instrumental. Good. Maybe it'll stop him from trying this elsewhere. Also, your mother wants to reconcile. Elara laughed bitterly. Of course she does. Now that I'm associated with a duke instead of exiled in disgrace. What should I tell her? Tell her I'll consider it in about 5 years. Maybe 10. Marcus smiled. Fair enough, and there's one more thing. Several London families are asking about investment opportunities in rural estates. They've heard about Thornwick's success and want to replicate it. We're not successful yet. We're just not failing. In London terms, that's revolutionary. He paused. They're specifically asking about you, Elara, wanting to hire you as a consultant, offering significant fees. The idea was absurd. Her consulting on estate management when she'd learned everything through desperation and trial by fire. But looking at Thornwick, at the school, the fields, the well, the mill slowly being rebuilt in stone, she saw what Marcus meant. They'd taken something dying and made it live again. Tell them maybe, after we get through our first profitable harvest. That night, another celebration at the tavern. Smaller than the school opening, just the core group who'd been there from the beginning. Thomas, David, Anne, Dr. Chase, Mrs. Hadley, Marcus, Alexander. The people who'd believed when belief was expensive. To Elara, Thomas raised his glass, who came here unmarriageable and somehow made herself indispensable. I'll drink to that, Dr. Chase growled, though she's still too stubborn for her own good. Says the man who threatened to amputate my leg over a minor infection, Elara shot back. It was getting infected. I was being prudent. The laughter felt earned, real. These people knew her. Not the London version who'd hidden in alcoves, but the actual person she'd become through mud and fire and relentless determination. Later, walking back to the manor under stars that felt close enough to touch, Alexander matched her pace. Can I ask you something? Depends on the question. That night at the ball, when I said what I said, did you hate me? She considered lying, giving him the easy answer, but they'd built this on honesty, even when it hurt. No, I hated myself for believing I could be enough for people like you, for thinking if I just tried harder, smiled more, made myself smaller, someone would finally see value in me. You just said out loud what I'd been telling myself for years. I'm sorry. I know, but I'm not. Because if you hadn't destroyed me in public, I never would have left. Never would have found this. Never would have discovered I'm capable of more than being decorative. She stopped, turning to face him. So in a strange way, thank you for being cruel enough to set me free. That's not... I don't deserve gratitude for being awful. No, but you deserve acknowledgement for what you've done since, for showing up, doing the work, proving you could change. That takes courage, too. He reached for her hand, the one not bandaged, the one that had held so many things together. Where do we go from here? I don't know, but I know what we don't do. We don't rush. We don't build this on guilt or fascination or trying to fix the past. If there's something real between us, it'll survive patience. And if I'm willing to be patient, then prove it. Keep showing up. Keep working. Keep being the person who signs partnership agreements instead of demanding control. And maybe eventually I'll trust that this isn't just another performance. I can do that. We'll see. But she let him keep holding her hand as they walked, and that felt like enough for now. Spring came fully, turning Thornwick green in ways the locals said they hadn't seen in a decade. David's crops flourished. The new mill began operating, powered by a water wheel that worked better than the old one. Dr. Chase's clinic saw fewer emergencies and more preventive care. The school expanded to evening classes for adults. And through it all, Elara worked, not as the lady managing from above, but as one member of a community that had finally accepted her as their own. The village council met weekly, making decisions that sometimes frustrated her but more often impressed her with their practicality. Thomas proved to be a natural leader, firm but fair. William remained skeptical of outsiders but channeled his energy into improving roads and market access, and transformed the school into the village's heart, a place where everyone gathered to share news and debate ideas. Alexander stayed too, taking a cottage in the village rather than the manor, earning his place through labor rather than title. She watched him change, saw the performing duke give way to someone more genuine, rougher around the edges, more real. But she didn't let herself fall. Not yet. Not until she was sure this was about who they actually were, not who they'd been or who they were trying to become. The first harvest under David's rotation system came in August. The yields weren't spectacular, transformation took time, but they were better. Measurably, provably better. Enough to repay debts, to invest in next year's seed, to hire 2 more families to work the expanding fields. Enough to prove the plan worked. The celebration lasted 3 days, a festival that drew people from neighboring villages, merchants wanting to trade, even a journalist from London documenting the miraculous resurrection of Thornwick Estate. Elara gave the interview, talking about soil science and investment and community governance, carefully avoiding any mention of ballrooms or dukes or personal redemption. This wasn't about her story. It was about what happened when people were given resources and respect instead of charity and control. But the journalist was clever. They say you were engaged to the Duke of Ashford, that you came here after a scandal in London. They say a lot of things. Is any of it true? What's true is that I came here with nothing but a name and desperation. What's also true is that this village took a chance on me when they had no reason to. Everything else is gossip. And the Duke? He's been here for months. People are talking. People always talk. But if you're writing about Thornwick, write about the tenant farmers who trusted experimental agriculture. Write about the doctor who came out of retirement to serve people who can't pay him. Write about the children learning to read in a school built by their parents' hands. That's the real story. The article ran in 3 major papers. Elara refused to read it, but Marcus sent her the highlights. A revolution in rural management, unprecedented cooperation between classes. Miss Whitcombe has accomplished what most reformers only theorize about. It brought more attention, more investors, more people wanting to replicate Thornwick's success elsewhere, and it brought her sister. Violet arrived unannounced on a September afternoon, stepping out of a carriage that was far too fine for Thornwick's rough roads, looking around with wide eyes. Elara! She barely recognized her. The shy girl was gone, replaced by someone polished and confident, a diamond of London society. Violet, what are you doing here? I had to see for myself. The things people are saying, I couldn't believe they were talking about my sister, the one who used to hide in the library. She looked around at the village, at the fields, at the manor. You did all this? Not me. We did it, together. Violet studied her face with an intensity that made Elara uncomfortable. You look different, older, harder, but happier, I think. I am. Mother's furious, you know. Says you've made yourself unmarriageable all over again, but this time by choice. She doesn't understand why you'd choose this over London. Does she need to understand? No, but I do. Violet grabbed her hands. Teach me. How you did this. How you became someone people respect instead of just someone they tolerate. Elara looked at her sister, still so young, still trapped in the world she'd escaped, and felt something shift. Maybe her story wasn't just about her own transformation. Maybe it was about showing others that transformation was possible. It starts with being willing to fail publicly and spectacularly. Can you do that? Violet smiled, nervous but determined. I can try. That night, showing Violet around the estate, introducing her to the people who'd become family, Elara felt the last piece of something slot into place. She'd come here broken, convinced she was worthless. She'd built a life through desperation and stubbornness, and refusing to quit even when quitting made sense. And now, standing in the village square with her sister asking questions, and Alexander watching from a distance with quiet pride, and Thomas arguing with David about next season's planting, Elara realized something fundamental. She'd stopped being the woman no one chose. She'd become the woman who chose herself. And everything else, the respect, the community, the possibilities with Alexander or David or whoever, those were bonuses, extras. Not the foundation, just the decoration on something she'd built from broken pieces and burning determination. The woman who'd left that London ballroom had been running from rejection. The woman standing in Thornwick Square was running towards something better. And for the first time in her life, Elara Whitcombe wasn't afraid of what came next. But fear was a persistent companion, even in moments of clarity. Elara woke the next morning to find Violet already dressed, standing at the window watching the village come alive with morning routines. Her sister looked younger in the dawn light, less polished society lady, and more like the girl who used to sneak into Elara's room for late-night conversations about books and dreams. They're different here, Violet said without turning. The people. They look you in the eye. Because they're not performing, not pretending to be something they're not just to survive. Is that what we were doing in London? Every single day. Violet turned, her expression troubled. Mother wants me to marry Lord Ashworth's son. He's dull and condescending and treats me like I'm decorative furniture, but he has money and title, so I'm supposed to be grateful. Are you going to do it? I don't know. What else is there? Elara crossed the room, taking her sister's hands. There's this. There's building something that matters. There's choosing yourself over expectations. It won't be easy. Hell, it's been brutal. But at least it's real. I'm not brave like you. I wasn't brave. I was desperate. There's a difference. But desperation taught me something. You don't find courage before you jump. You find it on the way down. A knock interrupted them. Mrs. Hadley, looking grim. Village council called an emergency meeting. Thomas says you need to come now. The council room, a converted storage building near the tavern, was packed. Not just the elected members, but most of the village, their faces tight with worry. Thomas stood at the head table, a letter in his hand. "What's wrong?" Elara asked. "This arrived this morning, from the regional magistrate." He passed her the letter, his jaw clenched. Elara read, her stomach sinking with each word. Someone had filed a formal complaint against Thornwick's governance structure, claiming the tenant council violated property laws and tenant rights. The magistrate was launching an investigation. If they found against the village, the charter would be dissolved, all decisions reversed, and traditional estate management reinstated. "Who filed the complaint?" Alexander asked, appearing at her shoulder. "It doesn't say, but it demands all financial records, governance documents, and testimony from tenants about their treatment under the new system." William stood, his face red. "This is because of you. Because you gave us power and someone in London doesn't like peasants making decisions." "Or someone doesn't like me proving their system doesn't work," Elara countered. "This is about control, not legality." "Doesn't matter what it's about if they shut us down," Anne spoke up from the back. "So we fight. We show them our records, prove the system works better than the old way." "And if they don't care about proof?" Thomas asked. "If this is about putting us back in our place?" The room erupted in arguments, some wanting to fight, others wanting to capitulate before things got worse, still others suggesting they abandon the whole experiment and return to traditional management. Elara listened to the chaos, feeling the fragile trust they'd built threatening to shatter. One legal challenge, and everything came apart. Maybe they'd been fools to think they could change a system designed to keep people like them powerless. Then Alexander's voice cut through the noise. "The complaint is legal nonsense. I've reviewed the property laws. There's nothing prohibiting voluntary governance structures. Whoever filed this is counting on intimidation, not legitimacy." "You're a duke," William shot back. "You can say that because laws protect you. For us, legal or not, doesn't matter if a magistrate decides against us." "Then we make sure he can't decide against facts." Alexander turned to Elara. "You've kept meticulous records, harvest yields, income statements, tenant satisfaction surveys. We present evidence so overwhelming they can't ignore it. And if they do ignore it, then I use my position in Parliament to make this a national issue. Force a debate about property rights and tenant governance. Make it so expensive politically to shut you down that they have to let you succeed." David stepped forward. "That's risky. You'd be fighting your own class, making enemies in the Lords." "Good. They deserve enemies who will tell them the truth instead of flattering their egos." Elara looked at him, seeing the man he'd become fully now. Not the performing duke or the guilty suitor, but someone genuinely committed to overturning the systems that had made him comfortable. It should have made her trust him completely. Instead, it terrified her. "Everyone out," she said quietly. "Council only." The room cleared, leaving just the 7 elected members and Alexander, who hesitated at the door. "You too, Your Grace." "Elara, you don't get a vote here. That's the whole point of the charter." He looked like she'd slapped him, but he left. When the door closed, she turned to the council. "We have to decide this ourselves. Not because a duke tells us it'll work out, not because I promise to fix it. We decide what we're willing to risk." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we fight, but I'm also suggesting we prepare for the possibility we lose. Set aside money for legal fees, document everything, and have a plan for what happens if the magistrate rules against us. And if we lose everything? Then we start over. Rebuild under whatever system they force on us and keep pushing for change. But we do it together, as equals, not as lady and grateful peasants." William surprised her by nodding. "I still think you're trouble, but you're our trouble. If we're going down, might as well go down swinging." The vote was unanimous. They'd fight. The next 2 weeks were brutal. Elara and the council compiled evidence, financial records showing increased profits, tenant testimonies about improved conditions, agricultural data proving David's methods worked, medical reports from Dr. Chase showing reduced mortality. Every document was checked, double-checked, organized into arguments that even the most hostile magistrate couldn't dismiss. Alexander worked his connections in Parliament, quietly building support for a reform bill that would legitimize tenant governance structures across England. It was ambitious to the point of insanity, but he attacked it with the same intensity he brought to building the school. "You don't have to do this," Elara told him one night, finding him in the Manor's library surrounded by legal texts. "Yes, I do." "Why?" "This could destroy your political career." He looked up, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Because I've spent my entire life upholding systems that hurt people like you, that told you your value was in your face and your compliance, not your mind and your courage. I can't undo that. But I can make sure the next generation of women like you don't have to burn their whole lives down to prove they matter." "That's not your guilt to carry." "Maybe not, but it's my choice to carry it anyway." She wanted to argue, to tell him he was being dramatic, but looking at the evidence of his work, the bills drafted, the alliances built, the risks he was taking with people who'd been his friends and colleagues, she couldn't deny the sincerity. "If you do this, if you actually succeed in changing these laws, you'll make powerful enemies. I have powerful enemies already, might as well earn them honestly." The magistrate arrived on a gray October morning, accompanied by 2 clerks and an air of bureaucratic superiority. Edmund Hartwell was exactly what Elara expected, middle-aged, pompous, already convinced of his conclusions before hearing evidence. The hearing was held in the tavern, the largest public space in the village. Every resident who could fit squeezed in, standing room only, their faces tense with worry. Hartwell called the proceedings to order, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. "This inquiry concerns allegations of illegal governance structures at Thornwick Estate. Miss Whitcombe, you're accused of abdicating your legal responsibilities as property owner and creating an unsanctioned tenant authority." "I'm aware of the allegations," Elara said calmly. "They're based on a fundamental misunderstanding of property law." "Are they?" "Explain." She stood, pulling out the first set of documents. "English law permits property owners to delegate management authority through legally binding contracts. I haven't abdicated responsibility. I've created a partnership with my tenants, formalized through proper legal channels. A partnership implies equal standing. Tenants cannot have equal standing with landowners." "Why not?" The question hung in the air. Hartwell blinked, clearly not expecting to be challenged. "Because that's not how the system works. The system works however we agree it works. And we've agreed to this." She gestured to the council. "These people understand this land better than I ever could. They live on it, work it, raise their children on it. Why shouldn't they have decision-making power?" "Because they lack education, breeding, the capacity for complex governance." "Thomas Garrett," Elara interrupted, nodding toward the council chairman, "runs a farm that feeds 50 families, manages crop rotations across multiple fields, and negotiates trade agreements with merchants from 3 counties. William Thorne maintains infrastructure for an entire village, plans repairs years in advance, and solved a drainage problem that stumped 2 professional engineers. Ann Fletcher educates children from 5 different economic backgrounds, creates curricula that actually prepare them for useful work, and mediates disputes between families with generations of bad blood. Tell me again how they lack capacity for complex governance." Hartwell's face reddened. "This is irregular. This is effective. Which is why someone filed a complaint, not because we're breaking laws, but because we're proving the old system doesn't work as well as its beneficiaries claim." "You're making accusations without evidence. Then let's discuss evidence." For the next 3 hours, Elara and the council presented their case. Financial records showing Thornwick's profits had increased 40%. Medical data showing child mortality had dropped to almost 0. Agricultural reports demonstrating soil improvement and yield increases. Tenant testimonies about improved living conditions and economic stability. Hartwell tried to interrupt, to dismiss, to redirect. But every time he opened his mouth, someone had another piece of evidence, another argument, another proof point he couldn't refute. Finally, Alexander stood. "Magistrate Hartwell, I've brought a petition signed by 12 members of Parliament, including 3 lords. It calls for immediate legislative review of tenant governance structures and formally challenges the legal basis of this investigation." Hartwell went pale. "Your Grace, this is highly improper. So is launching an investigation based on anonymous complaints without preliminary fact-finding. So is assuming guilt before hearing evidence. So is using the legal system to punish innovation simply because it threatens established hierarchies. Alexander's voice was cold, controlled fury. This hearing is a farce, and we both know it. The only question is whether you're willing to make it official by ruling against overwhelming evidence. The room held its breath. Hartwell looked at the documents, at the crowd, at Alexander's unwavering stare. Political calculations played across his face. The risk of ruling against a duke who'd gone public with support, the embarrassment of having his decision appealed and overturned, the precedent of validating tenant governance. This matter requires further review, he said finally. I'm suspending the investigation pending additional consultation. It wasn't victory. But it wasn't defeat either. It was bureaucratic retreat, which in its own way was admission of failure. The tavern erupted in cheers. Thomas grabbed Elara in a bear hug. Anne was crying. Even William cracked a smile. But Elara watched Hartwell gather his papers with tight, angry movements and knew this wasn't over. She found Alexander outside, leaning against the wall, looking drained. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He'll be back with different charges, different angles. Men like Hartwell don't give up. They regroup. I know, but you bought us time. That matters. He turned to face her. It's not enough. Time just delays the inevitable. We need actual legal protection, which means pushing that reform bill through Parliament. That could take years. Then I'll spend years on it, however long it takes. She studied his face, seeing the determination there, the commitment that had replaced performance. When had she stopped doubting his sincerity? When had the Duke who'd destroyed her become the man she trusted most to fight beside her? Why are you doing this? Really? Because I love you. The words dropped into the cold October air like stones into still water, simple, direct, terrifying. Alexander, I'm not asking you to say it back. I'm not asking for anything except honesty. And the honest truth is that watching you build this, fight for it, refuse to quit even when quitting makes sense, it changed something in me. Made me realize I'd been performing my whole life instead of actually living. You don't perform. You just are. And I love who you are. Elara felt tears threatening, unexpected and unwelcome. I can't. I don't know if I can give you what you want. I'm not asking you to give me anything. I'm just telling you the truth. What you do with it is your choice. And if I choose nothing, if I say I'm not ready, maybe never will be ready, then I keep showing up anyway, keep working, keep fighting, keep being someone you can count on, even if you never love me back. Because this isn't about winning you like some prize. It's about being worthy of you, and that's a lifetime project. She should have been annoyed by the declaration, by the pressure of his feelings. Instead, she felt something crack open in her chest. Not love exactly, but the possibility of it. The permission to consider it without fear. I need time. Take all you need. I'm not going anywhere. Winter came hard that year, the coldest anyone could remember. Snow fell in November and didn't stop, burying the village in white silence. The harvest was in, stored carefully according to David's instructions. The mill ran on schedule. The school stayed open even when the cold made fingers too stiff to write. And slowly, news arrived from London. Marcus wrote first, Alexander's reform bill is gaining traction. 3 more lords signed on, including 2 who usually oppose any change. Society's talking about Thornwick like it's Camelot. You're famous, whether you want to be or not. Then Anne received a letter from a women's education society asking about her teaching methods. Dr. Chase got inquiries from medical associations about his community health model. David was invited to present his agricultural research at Cambridge. Thornwick had become something bigger than itself, proof that different systems could work, that tenant governance wasn't chaos, that women could manage estates and peasants could make complex decisions. But with fame came scrutiny. The second attack came in January, during the worst of the winter storms. Not legal this time, financial. Someone had bought up the estate's remaining debts and was calling them all in simultaneously. Not Pembroke. He was still fighting fraud charges. Someone new, someone with deeper pockets and better lawyers. The amount was staggering, £800, due in 30 days. We can't raise that. Thomas said flatly, staring at the demand letters. Even with the good harvest, we don't have liquid capital like that. We could sell assets, Anne suggested. The equipment, some livestock. That would cripple next season's planting. We'd be right back where we started. William's voice was defeated. Maybe it's time to admit we can't win, not against people with unlimited resources. Elara felt the despair in the room, felt her own hope wavering. They'd fought so hard, built so much, and it was all going to collapse over money. Just like London, just like everything. Money decided who got to succeed and who got crushed. There's another option, David said quietly. Everyone turned. My research. Cambridge wants to publish it, use it as the basis for a new agricultural program. They offered me a position, professor's salary, research funding, everything, but they also said if I licensed my methods to the university, they'd pay a licensing fee. I asked how much. They said they'd have to calculate based on potential application, but preliminary estimates were around £1,000. Silence. You'd give that to Thornwick? Thomas asked. It's Thornwick's research. I just documented what we all built together. The money should go to protecting what we've created. That's your career, your future. My future is here, with people who see me as more than a scholar who can help their farming yields. This place gave me a home, time to pay rent. Before anyone could respond, Alexander spoke from the doorway. You won't need to. I've secured additional investors, 3 lords who believe in the project and have the money to back it. They're willing to buy into Thornwick as partners, equal terms, same structure as my agreement. Elara stood. You went behind my back? I went to people who could help and presented them with a business opportunity. They said yes because the numbers work, not because I begged. That's not the point. The point is we can pay the debts and have capital left over for expansion. The point is you don't have to sacrifice everything every time someone attacks. The point is accepting help isn't weakness. I don't need you rescuing me. I'm not rescuing you. I'm standing beside you while you rescue yourself. There's a difference, and you need to learn it. The argument might have escalated, but Thomas slammed his hand on the table. Enough! We vote. All in favor of accepting both David's offer and the Duke's investors? 6 hands went up. Elara's stayed down. Motion carries. Miss Whitcombe, I respect your pride, but the village needs stability more than it needs your martyrdom. We're accepting the help. She wanted to be angry, wanted to accuse them of not understanding, of giving up the independence they'd fought for. But looking at their faces, tired, determined, united, she recognized something she'd been too stubborn to see. They weren't giving up control. They were sharing burden, and there was strength in that too. Fine, but I want contracts reviewed by an independent solicitor. No hidden clauses, no backdoor control mechanisms. Agreed, Alexander said. The debts were paid. The investors brought not just money, but connections, markets for Thornwick's goods, expertise in legal structures, political protection against future attacks. The estate expanded, bringing in more families, more land under David's agricultural methods. By spring, Thornwick wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And London noticed. The reform bill passed the House of Lords in April by a narrow margin that Alexander said took years off his life in stress. It wasn't everything they'd hoped for. The language was watered down, the protections limited, but it established legal precedent for tenant governance structures. Thornwick was now officially legitimate. The celebration lasted a week. People came from across the region to see the village that had changed the law, to meet the woman who'd made it happen. Elara gave tours, answered questions, deflected credit to the people who'd actually done the work. But privately, in quiet moments, she let herself feel the enormity of it. They'd won. Not completely, not forever. There would always be new fights, new threats, but they'd proven something fundamental. Change was possible. Marcus arrived with an invitation that made her laugh in disbelief. The Midsummer Ball. Your mother wants you to attend, says it's time to mend fences, show London you've succeeded. She wants to parade me around as proof that exile worked out. Probably, but it's also an opportunity. Half of London's society wants to invest in rural estates now. You could leverage that, help other villages do what you did here. Or I could stay here and keep building what actually matters. You could do both. She looked at the invitation, gilded edges, perfect calligraphy, everything she'd rejected 2 years ago. The idea of returning to that ballroom, to the scene of her greatest humiliation, should have terrified her. Instead, she felt curious. What would it be like to walk into that room as who she'd become instead of who she'd been? "I'll think about it." Alexander found her that evening in the fields, watching David's wheat grow golden in the late spring sun. "Marcus told me about the invitation." "Of course he did." "Are you going?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to. Part of me thinks it's a trap, that going back means giving them power over me again. Or it means showing them you're not the woman they dismissed, that you built something they're desperately trying to copy now." She turned to face him. "You think I should go?" "I think you should do whatever makes you happy. London, Thornwick, somewhere completely different. It doesn't matter as long as it's your choice." "And if I choose London? Go back to that world?" His face showed pain, quickly masked. "Then I'd wish you well and mean it. Your happiness doesn't depend on being here or being with me. It depends on being true to yourself." She studied him. This man who'd changed as much as she had, who'd given up comfort and status to fight for something better. When had he stopped being the Duke and become just Alexander? "I love you." The words surprised her as much as him. She hadn't planned to say them, hadn't realized they were true until they were spoken. But standing in the golden light with everything they'd built around them, she couldn't deny it anymore. "You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because it's true. I love you for staying when leaving made sense, for fighting beside me instead of trying to fight for me, for becoming someone real instead of performing someone acceptable." She took his hands. "I love you, and it terrifies me, but I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions." He pulled her close, and she let him. Let herself feel the safety of someone who'd proven through action that he could be trusted. "What does this mean?" he asked against her hair. "I don't know, but I want to find out." They decided to go to London together. Not as Duke and Charity Case, not as guilty man and his redemption project, but as partners who'd built something worth showing the world. The journey took 3 days. Elara watched the countryside transform from wild hills back to manicured estates, felt the familiar anxiety creeping in as London's sprawl appeared on the horizon. "We can turn back," Alexander said, reading her tension. "No. I need to do this, need to prove to myself I've actually changed and didn't just trade one cage for another." The midsummer ball was exactly as she remembered, glittering, excessive, everyone performing their assigned roles. But this time, walking in on Alexander's arm, dressed in a gown that was fine but not ostentatious, her hands still bearing the faint scars of work, Elara felt different. She wasn't hiding, wasn't apologizing for existing. She was there by choice, and she could leave any time she wanted. The ballroom went quiet as they entered. Every eye turned, assessing, judging. Elara felt the weight of their attention, but didn't flinch from it. Her mother materialized, her smile brittle. "Elara, how wonderful you could come." "Mother, you look different." "I am different." "Yes. Well." Her mother's eyes flicked to Alexander. "Your Grace, thank you for escorting my daughter." "It's my honor, Lady Whitcombe." The awkwardness was profound. Elara was about to make an excuse to leave when Violet appeared, radiant in white silk. "You came. I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I. You look beautiful." "I look acceptable. You look alive." Violet grabbed her hand. "Come on. There are people I want you to meet, people who actually understand what you've done." She was introduced to a circle of younger women, daughters of lords and merchants, trapped in the same system Elara had escaped. They peppered her with questions. How did she convince tenants to trust her? How did she learn estate management? How did she survive the criticism? "I didn't survive it," Elara said honestly. "I let it destroy the person I was pretending to be. And then I built someone real from the pieces." "But how do we do that?" one girl asked desperately. "We don't have estates to run to. We don't have options." "You have more options than you think. They're just not the ones you've been taught to see." Elara looked around at their young, trapped faces. "Start small. Find something you care about and get good at it. Learn skills that matter: accounting, medicine, agriculture, anything useful. Build relationships with people who see you as more than decorative, And when the time comes to choose between comfort and truth, choose truth. It's harder, but at least it's yours. She didn't know if they'd listen, didn't know if any of them had the desperation or courage to actually change. But she'd planted seeds, and sometimes that was enough. The evening progressed. Elara danced with Alexander, with Marcus, even with Thomas, who'd traveled to London for the Reform Bill vote and looked deeply uncomfortable in formal wear. She made conversation with lords who wanted to invest in rural development. She deflected her mother's attempts at reconciliation without burning bridges entirely. And then she found herself face to face with Lord Pembroke. He looked older, defeated. The fraud charges had been dropped due to lack of sufficient evidence, but his reputation was destroyed. No one would do business with him. His peers avoided him at social functions. "Miss Whitcombe," his voice was hollow. "Lord Pembroke, I suppose you're satisfied? You've won." This was never about winning. It was about surviving. You just happened to be in the way. "I underestimated you. Thought you were just another silly girl playing at importance." He looked at her directly for the first time. "I was wrong." It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement, which was more than she'd expected. "Yes, you were." She walked away, leaving him to his failures, feeling nothing but mild pity. He couldn't hurt her anymore. No one here could. She'd found power in a place they couldn't reach, built strength from sources they didn't value. Near midnight, Alexander found her on the balcony where she'd escaped for air. Ready to leave? More than ready. Back to Thornwick? She looked out at London. All lights and noise and performance. 2 years ago, she would have given anything to belong here. Now she couldn't wait to leave. Yes, back to Thornwick. Back to home. They left quietly, without fanfare, and Elara didn't look back. The return journey felt faster, the anticipation pulling them forward. When they finally crested the hill overlooking Thornwick Valley, Elara felt something in her chest loosen completely. There it was, the village she'd helped build, the fields she'd helped restore, the people who'd become family. Not perfect, not finished, but real and growing, and hers in ways London never would be. The village welcomed them back with a gathering at the tavern. Nothing fancy, just friends sharing food and stories. Dr. Chase grumbled about patients who'd ignored his advice while he was gone. Anne showed Elara test results from the children. Reading scores had improved dramatically. David presented plans for expanding the agricultural program to neighboring estates. Thomas pulled her aside, his expression serious. "The council voted while you were gone. We want to make you a permanent member, not as the landowner, as an equal, someone who's earned her seat through work, not birth." Elara felt tears threatening again. "I'd be honored." "Good. Because you're stuck with us now. No running back to fancy balls." "I don't want fancy balls. I want this." Later, walking back to the manor with Alexander, she felt the weight of 2 years settling into clarity. She'd come here broken and desperate. She'd stayed through fire and fraud and constant crisis. And somehow, in the surviving and building and refusing to quit, she'd become someone she actually respected. "What happens now?" Alexander asked. "We keep building. Expand the agricultural program, help more villages implement tenant governance, push for stronger legal protections. There's so much work left to do." "That's not what I meant." She stopped, turning to face him in the moonlight. "What did you mean?" "I meant us. What happens with us?" Elara took his hands, feeling the calluses that matched her own. "I think we build something together. Not because I need rescuing or you need redemption, but because we're better together than separate, whatever that looks like. Marriage? Eventually, maybe, but on our terms, not society's. Equal partnership, shared work, mutual respect. If we do this, we do it right. I can live with that. Can you? Because I'm not becoming a duchess who hosts parties and looks decorative. I'm staying here doing this work. Your life would be here too. My life is wherever you are. The rest is just details." She kissed him then, in the middle of the road, under stars that felt close enough to touch. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was the beginning of something harder and more real, a life built on work and choice and refusing to accept the world as it was. They married 6 months later in Thornwick's village square with the entire community as witnesses. No cathedral, no society guests, no performance. Just two people promising to build a life together, surrounded by the people who'd helped them become worth building with. Violet attended, having broken off her engagement to Lord Ashworth's son, and moved to Thornwick to study agriculture with David. She'd never be a farmer, but she was learning to be something other than decorative, and that was enough. Marcus gave Elara away since her father refused to attend, and she didn't care enough to fight about it. Dr. Chase performed the ceremony, grumbling about romance being medically inadvisable, but doing it anyway. And students sang. Thomas stood as Alexander's witness, the tenant farmer, and the Duke standing as equals. And when Elara Whitcombe became Elara Ashford, she didn't feel like she was losing herself. She felt like she was claiming the final piece of who she'd fought to become. The years that followed weren't easy. Thornwick continued to grow, bringing new challenges and conflicts. Other estates tried to replicate their model with varying success. Political opposition to tenant governance remained fierce, requiring constant defensive battles in Parliament. But they built something lasting, a school that became a model for rural education across England, an agricultural program that restored depleted soil in dozens of regions, a governance structure that proved tenant authority could work if given genuine support, a community that valued substance over status, work over breeding, character over appearance. 5 years after that first midsummer ball humiliation, Elara stood in front of Parliament giving testimony about rural reform. The same lords who'd laughed at her dismissal now listened to her expertise. The same society that had called her unmarriageable now sought her advice on estate management. But the real victory wasn't their recognition. It was what she'd built in Thornwick, a place where a woman's worth wasn't measured by her face or her compliance, where survival depended on skill and courage rather than birth and status. The woman no one chose had become the woman everyone turned to, and standing beside her, Alexander had transformed from the Duke who judged by surfaces into someone who understood that real power came from lifting others up, not keeping them down. Together they changed not just Thornwick, but the entire structure of rural England, one village at a time, one law at a time, one converted skeptic at a time. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the village was settling into night, Elara would walk through Thornwick's streets and marvel at what desperation and stubbornness had created. Children learning in a school that shouldn't exist. Families thriving on land that had been dying. A community governing itself despite systems designed to prevent exactly that. She'd come here running from humiliation, convinced she was worthless because someone powerful had said so. She'd stayed because she'd had nowhere else to go. But she'd built something extraordinary because she'd refused to let anyone else define her worth. That night at the ball, when the Duke had called her forgettable, he'd been right. The woman she'd been was forgettable, designed to blend in, to apologize for existing, to shrink herself into acceptability. But the woman she'd become? She was unforgettable. Not because she was beautiful or charming or played by their rules, but because she'd burned those rules down and built something better from the ashes. Because she'd proven that a woman dismissed by society could change that society if she was willing to fight hard enough. The woman no one chose became the woman who chose herself. And that choice rewrote everything.